We're pretty excited to bring you this today. It's from today. It's today's ALGO committee investigation, and Danielle Smith makes an appearance. It's going to be super fun. I've only seen a couple of minutes, but immediately the Liberals are on the defensive, trying to block everything the Conservatives are doing. I saw that much. We're going to jump right into it. Thank you all for coming and checking us out. We've got a couple of new things we're trying. Let me know in the comments. Let me know in our chat what you think of. Is it too much? This seems very busy. Yeah, that does seem distracting. Anyhow, we're going to jump right into
call this meeting to order. We're here to discuss the estimates. Premier Higgs, the floor is yours for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Before we start, I'd just like to have, before you raise a point of order, I'm not here for, controversial debate. I would just like the opportunity
point of order,
to make a comment about thinking bigger in Canada and how we can meet the climate change objectives, and we can be a major player here in New Brunswick.
We will provide time for that.
Sorry, what's your point of order? Sorry, Premier Higgs, what's your point of order?
Mr. Chair, I'm looking forward to the testimony of both premiers today and getting an explanation from both of them why they're both raising taxes and the cost of heating and energy.
What's your point of order?
This is not a point of order. 12%. So I'm really interested to hear why they're raising the cost of living for their residents.
What's your point of order, Mr. Kuzmirchuk?
My concern, Mr. Chair, is that we are right now meeting in contravention of Standing Order 108. And also in contravention of a motion that this committee has passed yesterday that prohibits you, Chair, from calling meetings and witnesses unilaterally without consultation and consent from committee. And I would ask the clerk to provide some comment and direction on it, because this is now the third meeting this week that we've had scheduled without any consultation of committee, without any instruction from committee. This is the third meeting that is being held in a row during a constituency week, which is a sacred week that is focused on constituents. I know our Conservative colleagues couldn't give two hoots about our constituents, but we do.
Mr. Kuzmirchuk, can you just stick to the point of order, please, and not an editorial?
Absolutely, and I'm just about to wrap up here. And so whenever we have,
on a point of order, Mr. Chairperson, there's no interpretation, because apparently there are multiple microphones open at the same time, causing interference.
Is the interpretation on?
Sorry, interpretation is on. Mr. Savard Tremblay is just pointing out other people talking, but if you get to your point of order.
Yes.
What's up, Calamaru?
I'm just about to conclude right here shortly, because I do want to get to the premiers as well.
This guy is panicking, guys. He's freaking out.
Meetings during constituency weeks are
That's not a point of order. Mr. Kuzmirchuk, either get to the point of order or we will move back to Premier Higgs.
So my point, Mr. Chair, is I am asking the clerk to comment on whether this meeting is in contravention of both Standing Order 108 and also in contravention of the motion that this committee passed yesterday prohibiting the chair from calling meetings without consultation and consent of this committee. And what is particularly egregious, I have to say, is that, Mr. Chair, you called these so-called emergency meetings this week, 3 of them, and not one of the permanent Conservative members of this committee even bothered to show up.
Okay. I will address your point of order, Mr. Kuzmirchuk.
No one from the opposition leader's front bench bothered to show up to ask questions. That is egregious. We're here from the Liberal side, the NDP side, the Bloc side. We're here to do
Mr. Kuzmirchuk, you've made your point of order. I will rule on your point of order.
Conservative members of this committee. Where are the permanent members?
How are you,
Conservative members of this committee?
Point of order, Chair.
And why are they not here to do their work?
I will address your point of order. But Mr. Singh, on a point of order, then I'll address Mr. Kuzmirchuk's.
Happy Easter, everybody.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate
Briefly,
it.
please.
I appreciate that you made a ruling on this yesterday, I believe.
Big fan of Jaws Raj.
Once again is trying to silence another premier and not let them testify about the harmful impacts of a 23% increase on the carbon tax that's going to impact families worse.
You're the finance critic. You weren't even here yesterday.
Sorry, Mr. Kuzmirchuk. Please respect the interpreters, and for Mr. Savard Tremblay, just one person at a time. It is clear, committee, and I'm going to read, committee meetings are convened by the chair, and it can be after a decision made by the committee or on the chair's own authority. And that's right from page 29 or 1095 of the Green Book. With respect to the motion yesterday, as I stated yesterday, my ruling was, I believe it was...
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Kuzmierczak, let me finish, please. I will stop.
I asked the question of the clerk,
you
and
do
I'd
not,
like to hear from the
Mr.
clerk.
Kuzmierczak, you've been around for a long time. You know
And I
very
know
well
that
the
I'm
rules
asking the
that
clerk.
you do not address questions to the clerk. You know that very well, and it appears you're just being disruptive at this time. But I appreciate what you're saying. But
holy moly, guys!
The rules clearly allow the chair to call meetings on his own authority, which I did. With respect to the motion yesterday, as I ruled yesterday, my belief is that is for meetings going forward. You cannot I don't believe it could simply reach back in time and change what has already been booked. So that is what my ruling is. If you'd like to hear the clerk's response about my chair's ability to call a meeting, I'm happy to refer to him, and he can repeat from page 1095 himself.
Hey, Brad, what's up? How are you?
Point of order, Chair.
We're actually in a discussion. I'll get to you in a moment. On interpretation. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you stated on page 1095 of Procedure and Practice, it states under the section convening a meeting by the chair. Committee meetings are convened by the chair acting either on a decision made by the committee or on the chair's own authority. Therefore, my advice to the chair would be that there's two mechanisms to plan a meeting. Either the committee can agree to a schedule and a specific time and plan for a meeting, or the chair has the discretion to plan meetings on his authority.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
I realized someone else had called a point of order, but I saw Mr. Souza's hand was up. Is it on a point of order, Mr. Souza? Or
It's on this point of order.
Go ahead,
yes,
sir.
Yes, it's on a point of order. I just want clarity again from the clerk. So we have an opportunity here.
Thank you, Kirk. You're amazing.
The chair has the right to call these meetings. I understand, but he also has the right and the need to abide by the members' consent.
Okay, we've ruled on that already, Mr. Souza, so that's not a point of order. Thank you.
No.
There was someone else with a point of order. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I got a point of order.
Go ahead, Mr. Long.
Clarity on the rules.
Okay, I've advised, and the clerk has advised already, Mr. Souza. We'll be happy to email it out to you as well if you are having concerns about following along with the conversation.
You need consent.
Go ahead, Mr. Long.
I'm asking a question, Mr. Chair, and you're trying to now shut me down, and that's inappropriate. And again, it's the way you flagrantly operate independently without consulting with the members. So my question as a point of order is to the clerk.
Okay, Mr. Souza, you've been around for a long time as well, and it pains me to have to repeat this. Because it almost feels just like you're doing this on purpose, and I'm sure that is not your intent, Mr. Souza. You know, you cannot ask directions or questions of the clerk. It should be directed to the chair. So Mr. Kuzmierczak has already asked that about page 29, and I've ruled on it. And if you need for the clerk to repeat that to you, I will. But it appears you're doing this on purpose for either disruption of the committee or for some bizarre film clip. I'm not sure, but I'll have him repeat it for you if you wish.
Mr. Chair, that's not the intent here. My intent is to try to provide decorum in this committee to ensure that we operate collectively and cooperatively. Right now, unilateral decisions are being made by you, even yesterday's adjournment of the debate when we had a motion before the House. I'm asking the clerk through you to tell us if consent was required to do so.
I adjourned on a
point of order.
Okay, you can't point of order during a point of order or a point of order, But I adjourned on a disorder. I'll read the ruling. Disorder or misconduct in a committee may arise as a result of failure to abide by the rules, practices, respect the authority of the chair. Disorder and misconduct also include use of unparliamentary language, which we had yesterday. Failed to yield the floor, which we had yesterday. Persistent interruption. So that is directly from the Green Book. I can have the clerk reaffirm what's in the green book for you if you wish, but that was why.
Certainly, thank you, Mr. Chair. Under the section Committee Questions and Procedure Privilege, as stated by the Chair, committee may arise as a result of the failure to abide by rules, respect the authority of the Chair, disorder and conduct may include use of parliamentary language. I would cite also page 1099 in Chapter 20, stating that committee chair may adjourn the meeting if the Chair decides that a case of disorder or misconduct is so serious as to prevent the committee from continuing its work.
Thanks. I think it was Mr. Long, and then I have Mr. Nakvi.
Thank you.
No, sorry,
thank
Mr.
you,
Long.
Chair. Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good morning. And I'm just, I'm puzzled, Chair. This obviously is, I'm happy to be here.
What's your point of order, Mr. Long?
Well, Chair, I'm confused. Why is the Premier of New Brunswick here with respect to main estimates? Can you explain that? And also, Chair, I'm wondering if you're able to table any conversations or emails that led to the Premier being invited here for main estimates. Like, I've got questions on main estimates that I could certainly ask the Premier of New Brunswick. But,
Mr. Long, what is point of order, please?
I'm confused as to why the Premier of New Brunswick is invited here when we're supposed to be on main estimates. Can you explain that to me, Chair? Thank you.
Certainly. As was explained yesterday, we are on the main estimates. There is over $11 billion in spending related to the carbon tax, which is about a 66% increase from just 2 years ago, and I think about a 35% increase from last year. So it is discussion on items within the main estimates. Seven of the premiers. Mr. Long, I respected your time. I would ask you not to interrupt me. Allow me to continue, please. 7 of the 10 premiers wrote to the Liberal Finance Chair asking for a meeting to discuss this. He refused. So I thought it would be good for the Canadians who are represented by these 7 of the 10 premiers to be able to speak on the issue, and that is why. And they are invited to speak on the estimates. I can't help it if you're not clear on that, Mr. Long, but I have explained why.
You're telling me, Chair.
I'm going to Mr. Nakvi. Go ahead.
But Chair, I have the floor right now. So, Chair, you're telling me that the Premier of New Brunswick is able to answer questions from us on the main estimates? Is that not why we're here, Chair?
Mr. Long, the premiers representing 70% of Canadians have been invited to speak. It's not for you to decide their relevance as a witness, just like you could not...
Hey, Bruce, what's up? How are you?
You know, question the relevance of perhaps a parliamentary budget officer being here yesterday. I have advised you why. We will now go to Mr. Nakvi. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'm not trying to be disruptive. I'm just trying to understand the rules by which this committee and other committees, because there is an element of precedent setting that takes place when a particular committee acts in a particular way. And so I'm trying to understand under what rules we are acting here today. I'm asking the question of you. If the clerk can answer that question, I'll sincerely appreciate it. I would also sincerely appreciate, Chair, that you don't point an answer to the clerk to read. I think that's not fair. The clerk is an expert in parliamentary procedure, and he should be able to answer the questions without you guiding him exactly what answer he should be reading. Having said that, I'm looking at the motion that this committee passed just yesterday, and I'll just quickly read this,
Mr. Chair,
which says...
Please, Mr. Nakvi, just get to your point of order.
I'm getting to my point. I am getting to the point of order.
I understand what the Liberals are trying to do, trying to block Mr. Premier Higgs from testifying. Please just get to the point of order.
So with all due respect, that is not my intention.
Please get to the point of order.
Point of order. Point of order.
We already have someone at the floor, Mr. Kuzmirchuk, and I've mentioned already in respect to Mr. Savard Tremblay and to the interpreters, ask people not talk over the floor. Mr. Nakvi.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. And I am speaking to my point of order because the motion that was adopted by this committee yesterday speaks to that exact point, which says that it expressed A's disappointment in the chair for his disregard for the members and his duties as chair, and it stated that A, that when the committee undertakes to invite witnesses, that A, a witness list submission deadline be set by the chair with the explicit consent of the committee, B, witnesses be invited proportionally to each recognized party standing in the House, and C, no such witness be invited without instruction of the committee. And I'm wondering, Chair, first to you and then to the clerk, whether this motion is being respected. I have not seen any documentation that suggests to me that all these three things that were just adopted by this committee yesterday are being undertaken as it relates to witnesses today and moving forward. And I think I know you well, sir. You're a respectful member of Parliament, that you will not act in contravention of a motion of your own committee. So I just wanted some clarity as to what steps were followed to meet these conditions, and would like to also hear from the clerk as well, without you pointing an answer to him. Thank you.
I was not pointing or directing, but I appreciate that incorrect perspective. The motion yesterday, I made very clear, I don't believe is retroactive. So the meeting had already been called, the notice had already been put up, witnesses already done. Nowhere in the notice did it say retroactive. And so that was that. The meeting was booked, the witnesses been called, period. I'm not sure if the clerk wished, no, you wanted the clerk to weigh in on that. I'm not sure if he has an opinion, but please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you stated, I would leave it to the chair and the committee to interpret the motion and how it should be used moving forward. At this point, I would echo what the chair stated, that the notice was indeed published before this motion was adopted. That being said, based on the terms of the motion, I would leave it to the chair and the committee to decide how to interpret the mechanism and the way to move forward with the motion as it stands. At this point, I would not deem to interpret whether or not today's meeting applies to this motion. I leave it to the chair and the committee to decide how to move forward on that point.
Mr. Kuzmierczak, then Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Tremblay.
I was just, I was hoping to get the second part of my question answered, which the clerk provided his testimony, which I do appreciate. And again, we're all ready to...
Mr. Kuzmierczak, can we get to the point of order, please?
Yeah, I was just saying thank you for finally responding and answering
please get to your point of order.
Questions that I have. That's it. Thank you. Let's continue on with the
Mr.
questioning
Lawrence,
of the
and then Mr. Savard-Tremblay, please.
Yeah, it's clear what the Liberals are doing. They've raised a number of non-point of orders. It's time to hear from Premier Higgs. As he said, he's not interested in any type of partisan dispute or argument. Neither am I. I'm interested in hearing the representative of New Brunswick, and others may laugh at that, but I want to hear what.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Savard-Tremblay. Mr. Savard-Tremblay, you have your hand up.
Yes. Well, listen, I won't take part in this circus. I have a new jacket on and I don't want to get it dirty today. Now, I just want confirmation from your mouth, Mr. Chairperson, that there will be no meeting next week, and I'd like to know who the witnesses will be when we return.
There will be no meeting next week. April 8th and April 10th are our next meetings, and I believe it's, correct me on the order, it's Canada Post is one meeting, the second meeting is the red tape reduction study. Or maybe red tape reduction on the 8th and then Canada Post on the 10th, but I believe Canada Post is first. Mr. Higgs, Premier Higgs,
point of order, sir.
We go
sir,
back
one
to
more
you,
point
sir.
of order.
Point of order, Lord Almighty.
Sorry, Premier.
Mike Jackson,
sorry,
what's
Premier. I'm just reflecting on the words that the clerk was saying in response to my point of order, and I heard him say that it is up to the committee members to determine the interpretation of the motion passed. I think he said both chair and committee members, because you don't act, with all due respect, no, you, sir, the chair does not act in isolation.
Order, please, sir.
The point of order is that there was a clear intention on the part of the committee members when they passed the motion yesterday that it would apply to all witnesses, retrospective as well.
I appreciate that. I've stated very clearly that there's nothing that the meeting said was retroactive, or the motion said retroactive. If it did, it would be killing next April, or the NDP study next week, and the Liberal study on the red tape. Premier Higgs, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I guess, and I said I wasn't. I don't want to make this a political discussion. I want to make it about, we all don't like the carbon tax. I think we can all agree with party on we don't like the carbon tax, but we all have the same focus of how do we reduce emissions, how do we make a major impact on climate change, and for the better, and that's the goal that we are aligned on. So the point I'm reacting here to is mostly in relation to the Premier's. The Prime Minister's comments here just recently about give us a solution. We're open to solutions. And so what we're seeing as an opportunity here in New Brunswick is exactly what's happening in the West in relation to the development of LNG and the shipment of LNG across worldwide and the shutdown of coal plants. Now we have the Prime Minister stated there's no business case in New Brunswick. That's absolutely not true. The situation is we have a business case. We don't have a gas supply currently, and that is the issue, the gas supply. Now, is it economical to bring it from the West or bring it from the U.S.? No, it hasn't proven to be based on the cost of transportation. But it is economical to develop our very own resource here in New Brunswick. It's economical to the point that we have 77 trillion standard cubic feet here in our province. And with a consolidated effort from the federal government and the First Nations, we can deal with not only having an impact around the world by shutting down coal plants that are being built at record numbers in China, 80 to 100 a year, coal plants that exist in Europe at 174 in that range, coal plants that even in Atlantic Canada that are running, 4 of them, that could be shut down, and 50% reduction when you do that. So my plea here is across party lines to say, let's think bigger. Let's look at Canada as a solution to world environmental impact and changes in
Point of order, Chair.
As opposed to us being exactly focused on our internal affordability and the costs every day of living.
I apologize, Premier Higgs. I just have a point of order. Mr. Long, please make it brief.
Macaulay's getting tired of these guys.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just clueless, again, man. Chair, I'm confused on relevance.
Like, what the hell?
This is an opening statement, Mr. Long. Please show respect for the Premier. You may have disagreements with us, but please show respect for the Premier of your province.
And it's only early,
Chair, I
it's an opening statement. Let him finish this.
But again, I'm just wondering the relevance, and I'm also wondering, Chair, if you can explain again which of the votable items referred to in the committee contains the Canada carbon rebate. I'm confused. You able to let us know that, Chair?
Explained that yesterday, Mr. Long. Mr. Premier Higgs, go ahead. That's not a point of order. Mr. Higgs, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to continue in relation to the affordability point. We are one of the few nations that have the opportunity to have it all. We have the resources, which we've always thrived on. We have the ability to have major climate change impact beyond our borders, beyond the 1.5% of emissions that currently we're focused on internally. And we would do what other countries are doing to take advantage of offsetting coal plants, but offsetting demands in Europe for oil and gas from Russia. We have the ability in Canada to just think bigger and make an impact around the world. So while we can develop these resources, we can use those resources to develop new technology, to build better, cleaner environmental industries, to actually reduce the cost of impact of everyday costs of people living and working in the province, which means ultimately reducing the carbon tax. But it's not an isolated solution. It's a solution that has a broader impact around the world, and it can be proven. It can be proven very clearly
Morgan, thank you
that
so
it
much.
has a
awesome.
huge impact on reduction of emissions worldwide. We may want to think we're going to solve the problems in our own little bubble, but we are not. So I only ask the Prime Minister and all of you to let's have the opportunity. Let science look at what potential we can really have in reducing emissions and how we can play a major scene on the world scene. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier Higgs. We'll start with Mr. Bragdon. Welcome to OGO, Mr. Bragdon. The floor is yours for 6 minutes,
Bragdon
please.
should be pretty fun. He's fun in
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr.
Gets all
Premier.
wound up.
And sorry that you had to experience the inner wranglings of partisanship
Phoenix
here at
Adventures,
the
what's up?
beginning and onset of our committee deliberations today. But moving quickly here, we understand very clearly Canadians are speaking very loudly from coast to coast, including from New Brunswick, that the cost of the carbon tax is prohibitive, and most Canadians are worse off as a result of it and its impact on their standard of living and their ability to make ends meet at the end of each month. The PBO has made that very clear. 7 out of 10 premiers, including yourself, has called for this hike to be spiked in the carbon tax, and they also want immediate relief and would prefer that this tax would be axed altogether. It's punitive, it's prohibitive, it's disproportionately affects those of us that live in small towns and rural communities, and there's a lot of those small towns and rural communities here in New Brunswick. It also inhibits development and growth of our industry, especially within our agricultural sectors and natural resource sectors, which of course has an impact here in New Brunswick. So there's a lot of impacts of the carbon tax overall, and I want to give you lots of ramp to talk about that. But also, we're hearing it very loudly.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask.
Sorry, Mr. Bragdon, I'll stop your time. Mr. Kuzmierczak?
I wanted to ask my honorable colleague, and I really do appreciate it. I really enjoy working with him, but can he just point to the relevance to any of the votes that we are studying in the main estimates, that we have been asked to study in the main estimates? So as a committee, we are asked to study parts of the main estimates. Can he point to the relevance?
The question should be to the chair, not to other members, Mr. Kuzmierczak. And you're aware, as you've been here for a long, long time, and you've participated in many filibusters, meandering filibusters, that we always allow a wide latitude. Continue, Mr. Bragdon.
This is beyond latitude, Mr. Chair. I mean, this has nothing to do with any of the votes.
Mr. Bragdon has the floor. Would you allow him again, please, for the sake and respect for our interpreters and those listening through the interpretation, one person with the floor at the time. Mr. Bragdon, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just continuing, Premier, we also know the impact this has on seniors with fixed incomes, and their cost of living keeps going up, but yet their incomes are fixed. This is having a huge consequence across the country on everything from heating to obviously groceries to the cost of living and the price to fill up a car. And finally, I'll end with this point, and that is that, Mr. Premier, we have such amazing potential in New Brunswick and across Canada. And taxes and regulatory overreach that this current government federally is putting on our industry sectors and on our natural resources and agriculture is prohibitive to our development and growth as a province. So with that, over to you. Thank you for being here, Premier.
Welcome to the channel, new members.
Thank you for the question. And I guess in relation to the costs, by 2030, we'll quadruple our costs and tax costs related to carbon tax, the clean fuel standard tax, and the relation to the HST that goes with that. So in the sense of, is it getting more expensive to live and work in our country? Absolutely. Are we spending way too much money across the country so if you wonder, how does this get to main estimates, or what's the point of it all? We're spending money we don't have as a nation, and we have the opportunity to offset that with real benefits in reducing the emissions and having an impact worldwide. So my point is continues to say, we don't need to put the burden of climate action and climate change on the citizens of our country, and on the citizens, in my case, of this province, because we have the ability to fund it and provide the funds for technology to help people deal with affordability, to help people deal with situations that they're finding too difficult to meet everyday needs. So my issue is clear. Let's look at options. We need to think bigger. Our situation in the Canada is that we're too isolated in our bubble. We're not reaching our potential to help the world. And we're causing huge impact, financial impact, right across this country on our citizens. And it's unnecessary. We all have the same objective. We just have to figure out an easier way to get there and a reality in a way to get there. Because currently, this path is not reality. It's not how we're going to manage the future and meet our goals. And that is the point of all of this discussion. For me, it's about look at the science, look at the development of SMRs, look at hydrogen. It's all well and good, but the timing is not going to meet the needs of what the current schedule provides. And as a result, people are just going to pay more and pay more.
Hey, Daniel, what's
and what
up?
is going to
Hello,
be the
Marius,
impact on
what's
the
up?
environment? Is it going to be like 8% of our 1.5%? And we think we're solving the problems of the world by doing that, when we could be receiving, probably making an impact worldwide of 10% or 15%. But that could be a calculated number, very easily understood. So I want to continue to argue we just need to let the science let us help the world reduce emissions, not think we're solving it by our own little bubble calculation.
Mr. Premier, a quick question on that to follow up. Has the Prime Minister and his cabinet been reaching out to you regularly and other First Ministers talking about the pain that this carbon tax is obviously having on Canadians and how it could be mitigated? Are you having regular communication from the Prime Minister and his cabinet on this?
Well, there's various discussions internally, I guess, with members locally, but the solutions are only, okay, how do we offset this measure? How do we offset that measure? When in fact, you get to the root cause of why do we have this measure to begin with. So then you get down to the philosophy of the federal government in relation to the carbon tax. And you say, for what it is intended to achieve, is it achieving that? Because what
Hello,
was this
what's up?
unintended consequence, what it's going to cause on affordability of every issue from groceries to that right down the supply chain? Was that the intended consequence? And if it was, it's a poorly implemented process. And if you look at that and you say, what are other countries doing? How do they manage this? And then how can we manage it based on our abilities and utilizing our entire natural resources to be part of that solution?
Great. Mr. Chair, do I have a little bit more time?
15 seconds.
All right. Well, Mr. Premier, speaking of the potential that we have as a province.
What up, nowhere man? What's going on,
buddy? By removing the carbon tax, if you can give a quick answer to that, what immediate impact would it have?
Well, in a couple seconds, Premier Higgs.
Immediately, 20 cents, roughly 17 cents on the per liter, which would have a huge impact. But then going the full distance,
Ryan, what's up, man?
It could take off down the road about 50, 60 cents a liter.
Thank you, Premier
by
Higgs.
2030.
Thank you, Premier Higgs. Ms. Atwin, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being with us, Premier Higgs. And I just have 6 minutes, and so I will be going pretty fast with my questions, so I'm not trying to be rude. So I know today that, in the provincial legislature, there was set to be a debate on removing the provincial sales tax from the looming electricity increases that we're going to be seeing in the province on April 1st. And you denied, your party denied that debate, and you're here with us instead. So is this for a case of look over here and not what I have control over back at home?
No, control over is a reactionary process of what we're seeing across the country of increased costs. So that was my point in relation to we have a policy that incurs a counter policy to offset a poor policy. Okay. And that's
sorry, I have to keep going. So Premier Higgs, when you decided to drop the New Brunswick carbon pricing system, you said at the time during your press conference, and I'm going to quote you here, "We know that recently, and especially over the last few months, New Brunswickers have been feeling the impacts of inflation and are struggling with the higher prices on everything from food to fuel. By changing our approach, we can help New Brunswickers get money back into their pockets in the form of a quarterly rebate check from the federal government." I happen to agree with you, Premier, but I see that you've recently changed your stance on this. So
no,
is it the case that you're more interested in playing politics and actually looking after the affordability of New Brunswickers and tackling climate change?
Well, on the contrary, I think the playing politics I've witnessed here in the last half hour. The point of the issue on the carbon tax is saying, all right, can we, if we adopt the backstop, then people will get a check. Is that check offsetting the real costs they have? No, it's not.
Can you table that information to show us that the calculations?
With the calculation going right through to groceries, to cost of commodities, because it's more than fuel.
With us?
It's more than fuel. Yeah, I think there's a recent study where there was a Fraser Institute that was showing the impact on the carbon tax. I know what the Bank of Canada has said recently, but there are many studies showing that. So I'm sure there's other relevant data.
How much is the average rebate for a New Brunswicker, including the 20% rural top-up?
It's probably around $200, I think, a month, quarter, or in that range. About $700 a year, $736 a year.
I'm also going to quote, you've got a Twitter post here about your appearance today. You mentioned participating in the Standing Committee of Government Operations and Estimates to relay your concerns and stop the tax grab once and for all. So, sir, are you familiar with the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act?
Somewhat, maybe not as familiar as you are at this stage.
So Section 2.2 is the return of pollution pricing fuel charge proceeds to jurisdictions, and it breaks down the rebate process. So 90% of the fuel charge proceeds are returned directly to individuals and families through the Canadian carbon rebate. The remainder of the fuel charge proceeds are returned through federal programming to support schools, hospitals, small and medium-sized businesses, colleges, universities, municipalities. So I'm just wondering, which of the projects would you not have support? Would you like us to not see supported? There's energy retrofits for Indigenous communities infrastructure. We've got schools that are bringing down their price on their pollution in general, and they're actually saving money in their bills. So would you like to see these programs canceled along with the rebates?
Well, I think we were supplying supports to a lot of initiatives around through these different communities prior to a carbon tax ever coming on. To say we create more hurt on people in order to provide more federal money to distribute as they would see fit, I don't think that's a solution. I don't think that just charging people more so the federal government can have more say in where the money is distributed. I do not think that is a policy that you hurt one group in order to distribute to another.
So also, Mr. Premier, New Brunswick government passed legislation in 2022 to allow oil companies to pass clean fuel charges onto consumers and instructed the Energy and Utilities Board to determine what hypothetical costs might be. An independent analysis determined that here in New Brunswick, we are compensating companies for costs that do not exist, overcharging New Brunswickers at the pump anywhere from 5.6 cents to 8 cents a litre. So how much of this is rebated back to New Brunswickers?
So, Ms. Abbott, are you familiar with the fact that we have regulated pricing here in New Brunswick and in Nova Scotia and in Newfoundland and PEI?
So it's actually my questioning time, sir.
No, well, I guess let's put all the facts on the table because every one of those provinces.
Why is it okay to give money to oil and gas companies
Let
and
me
not
answer
to New
your question.
Brunswickers?
Let me answer your question. Every one of those provinces raised their price when the Clean Fuel Standards Act came into play. Every one of them. And our price is the cheapest that's in Atlantic Canada. So why did they do that? Why did they do that? I'll answer why they did that. Because the regulated pricing formula includes regulated changes to industry that are brought down by government. So that's why they did that. Our change was only to reflect the same logic that other regulated pricing has. Now, we could argue whether regulated pricing makes sense or doesn't make sense.
New Brunswick than the rest of the country.
No,
she's not coming off looking very good,
the same thing was raised
guys,
in the other three provinces. Maybe you missed that, but because it seems to have not been talked about much. Regulated pricing causes for a complete addition of all the incurred costs in order to arrive at the retail price.
So you disagree with the independent analysis that says that we're overcharging New Brunswickers?
Then she's condescending and arrogant.
We have EUB looking at that. That's the purpose.
Sir, we've seen that greenhouse gas emissions have come down by 8%. You've mentioned that this policy has done nothing. There's no measurable impact, and that the Canadian Climate Institute would disagree. Are you prepared to table a plan for New Brunswick that could achieve the similar or better results?
Worldwide? Absolutely.
For Canada?
Well, Canada, that's the whole point. We're thinking in a bubble. We are not thinking. Do you think that if China is building 80 to 90 coal plants a year, that would dwarf anything we can do in Canada? That we're safe, we're solving climate change? I propose to make the difference worldwide that we can actually achieve.
Sorry to interrupt, Premier Higgs. That is our time. Ms. Atwins, that's our time. Mr. Savard Tremblay for
Gerald
6 minutes.
J.
Go
Lemoyne,
ahead, sir.
how are you today, sir?
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Listen, I'd like to thank you, Premier Higgs, for being in attendance today and for your testimony. I won't be referring to the carbon tax because it doesn't affect Quebec, and so I prefer to focus on other topics. Now, first, let's talk about the transfers under the Official Languages Act. How much is New Brunswick receiving in terms of support for its linguistic minority, please?
I don't know the exact number, but it is significant.
Dave Johnson, what's up, man? Welcome to the channel.
It's quite significant. And tell me, what benefits does that provide for Francophone communities in New Brunswick overall?
Well, I think certainly in our case, we have two school systems that are operated through that. There are cultural centers that are set up because of that. We have obviously a Francophone of Vitality, Horizon Network, and Horizon 2 health networks in the province. And we see culturally, we see a real advantage in New Brunswick. I see an advantage that certainly we're not utilizing to its full extent. I have from the beginning said I wanted to see better results in our Anglophone school system so we could actually have every child graduating fluently bilingual, at least conversationally. And so my goal is if we are a bilingual province, truly, we all should be graduating kids that are speaking both languages. So the money that's used to enhance Francophone programs, cultural centers, is welcome from the federal government, and we do utilize it. Oh, I might add another point. We also increased our Francophone immigration through COVID and through beyond when we're looking to maintain the ratio of Francophones here in the province, not let that slide. So it runs in around 33%. But this is the last couple of years we have immigrated more Francophone immigrants than really any government for a long period of time and increased our percentage.
Merci.
Thank you. Now, you said you want better outcomes. Is the money adequate, or is it more about problems with distributing this money?
Well, as I've said probably many times, that the difficulty in measuring performance of money actually sent out is always difficult and never really. It's more of a headline to how much money spent than how much was achieved. But that doesn't only apply to Francophone or money from Ottawa in that regard. I say that about it. I'll mention it in relation to the current. The announcement regarding health support, like the $480 million, I think it is, over 10 years. While it is great to see that, when you think about $48 million falling into several buckets in
Thomas, what's up, guys?
In the province, is it going to be noticed on a $3.8 billion budget for us and another $3 a year for us, and maybe certainly less so in bigger provinces? Will it be noticed? My point would be this. We need a clinical information system in our province, and it'll be about $1 billion. And I would like to see targeted money as it comes from the federal government, because we can't do all this stuff otherwise. I would like to see us focus on real change in healthcare and be able to put it in a major solution that's going to have a significant impact.
Écoutez, j'y arrive sur la santé, mais...
Well, I'm going to speak about health in a moment, but my question was about linguistic minorities. Now, on healthcare, there was a common front on the part of the provinces demanding increases with no strings attached. What was your demand, please, if you could remind us?
Well, we would prefer to have no strings attached, for sure, and I think some provinces achieved that. I don't think that we did. But we were clear that we would identify exactly where the money was going, and I think that was many of the items we could agree on in that sense. So that's where we provided that information. Here's where we'd use it, and that was accepted. But I go back to game changers in health, and I feel like health is our biggest challenge. It's the biggest challenge in any election. It's the biggest challenge federally or provincially, even though we know it's a provincial responsibility. But we can make some big game-changing improvements in our healthcare across this country. A lot of that comes with sharing data, and a lot of that comes with an information system that can flow not only around the province, but around the entire country.
Man. How are you
helps
today?
Us get better and learn from each other's experiences.
Good to see you.
How much time do I have left, Mr. Chairperson?
I have about 1:20.
Perfect. Well, I hear you loud and clear. You said you didn't get this no strings attached transfer. You agree with where the money was sent and how it was earmarked. But unfortunately, the announcement isn't consistent with your demands, is it?
Well, we were given a suite of I guess, things that the money could be used for. My preference would be to say I want to put it in clinical information management systems, because I think that's what will make the biggest impact.
Thank you. On another topic, I said that I wasn't going to be talking about the carbon tax per se,
All for Truth,
but
Canadian
I would
Freedom
nevertheless like to ask you,
hey, Denise,
what
what's
are
up?
the other
How are you?
solutions in that case? why aren't you in favor of the carbon exchange?
You'll have to be
the
brief.
Other solutions
Brief answer.
Are very
Premier
evident.
Higgs.
I went through them with. They went through them with great length. I think the other solutions is for us to get outside of our bubble. Think bigger. Think about the impacting the world emissions and what we can do with our tremendous energy sources here in Canada.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Bachrach, I'd say I hope you're feeling better, but it's probably still under the weather. But go ahead for 6, please.
I'll do my best. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being with us, Mr. Higgs, Premier Higgs. Premier, you started your remarks talking about the cost of living for New Brunswickers, and certainly the cost of living for Canadians is something that everyone on this committee is concerned about. Now, in 2022, when inflation was even higher than it is now, people were struggling with the cost of living, and Canada's big corporations were making record profits. And there was one analysis by an economist by the name of David McDonald, and he found that for every dollar spent on those higher prices, 47 cents was converted to corporate profits. Now, 25 cents of that dollar went to corporate profits in just 4 industries, the leading of which was oil and gas. So for every additional dollar in inflationary costs, a quarter of that was going to the corporate profits of the companies that are producing and selling gasoline to consumers. I'm just wondering, when this was happening, when these corporations were gouging Canadian consumers and New Brunswickers, did you speak out publicly on behalf of New Brunswickers?
I have said all along that I think industry have to do their part, and they have to be the cleanest, producing the cleanest energy, lowest energy consumption to do so, and the lowest emissions. I think the point,
sir, I'm not talking about emissions here. I'm talking about cost of living and the cost that consumers are paying at the pump.
Yes.
Did you speak out and say the corporate profits are too high?
Well, I'm not familiar with the specifics of where the profits lay in the ratios that you just described, but I would say this. I think that we need to look at the cost of operating in our country and the cost of keeping businesses here. We've seen huge exodus of businesses, particularly west in Alberta, and we know the alternative. We know the alternative right here in New Brunswick. If you reference oil and gas, we know that we can buy refined product from countries that have no environmental standards at all. But we're still using the product. So we can make that choice of whether we want to buy from less, not only less efficient, but countries that we would not subscribe to their practices in any way, shape, or form. So there's the challenge you have in the industry, because as you push, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have full visibility into that, because I think that's important, but you will see that our operations are likely the cleanest in the world. So where do you go? Can we get better? Absolutely. Should profits pay for that in a company? Absolutely. But we do know that any producer of a commodity, the prices end up into the consumer's hand. And unless we control those companies as a state-owned company, then that's where it comes. And we know that. So the balance is, how do we keep companies operating, maintaining their facilities and staying here? And how do we have a fair price that they pay for operating in our country? And that has to be looked at in great detail. Nothing that I can just do politically and say we should do
I guess what I'm trying to get at, Premier, is that you've been very vociferous about the carbon price and the impact on consumers. And if you look at these things proportionally, if you look at the impact of the carbon price on the price of gas, or you look at the contribution of the carbon tax to inflation, and we have numbers from the Bank of Canada. I'm sure you're familiar with those. So while we have this analysis that shows that 47 cents of the inflationary dollar went towards corporate profits, we have the Bank of Canada saying that 0.15% of inflation is caused by carbon pricing. So that those seem vastly disparate numbers. And so what I was asking is whether the clear price gouging by oil and gas companies, and I looked at Gas Buddy and looked at New Brunswick, and the price of gas in New Brunswick has gone up 20 cents since January. 20 cents. We're talking, April 1st, the federal government is talking about 3 cents. So 20 cents. And I'm just wondering if you've spoken out on behalf of New Brunswickers that are getting gouged at the pump. by these oil and gas companies that are raking in massive profits.
So maybe you know how the pricing model works, and basically it's a market near a carbon market where the regulated pricing is set, and then the calculations go beyond that.
Like Blaine
but
Higgs,
what
guys,
I do
what
know
think?
for sure is that 20 cents of that right now is carbon tax, and by 2030, 62 cents of that will be carbon tax, and that goes to the federal government and in a circle program that is supposed to be solving climate change. So we do know that, don't we? So 60 cents will be in 2030 sent to the federal government. And why? What is that achieving? So I would say that maybe there's a combination to look at everything, but we do know how to take 60 cents a liter off of the price of commodities at the pumps and what people are paying.
I guess what I'm hoping, Premier Higgs, is that you would speak out against the corporate price gouging that's really
Richard? How are you today?
The factor that's costing New Brunswickers so much. But I'm going to move on to another question. Pierre Poilievre has said a Conservative government would not pull Canada out of the Paris Agreement. Is that a position that you support?
I think that there's a focused need to continue on the emission reduction program, and if the Paris Accord is, it's important to carry on in that program. I'm not suggesting we're pulling out of anything, and so my suggestion is for us to be broader than Canada, to think bigger about the impact.
But to be clear, and that's fine. We all want to think globally, but to be clear,
but we're not. We're not thinking globally. We're not even pretending to think globally.
My question, Premier Higgs, you said you support staying in the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is almost entirely predicated on reducing domestic emissions.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bachrach, we're over time. Can you just wrap up your question, please, sir?
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you saying, Premier Higgs, that you think we should stay in this international agreement but not live up to its core tenets?
I'm saying that we can do so much better. So if we are sitting idle, costing people more money, and we're not impacting the world emissions, then who are you fooling? Maybe the Paris Accord should be modified to say those nations that can have a greater impact should have the opportunity to do so.
Thanks, Premier Higgs.
If you do a comparison,
I have to cut you off there, I'm afraid. We're past time. Mr. Ellis, please. Welcome to OGO for 5 minutes, sir.
Well, thanks, Chair. It's good to be back at OGO. And Mr. Premier, thanks for being here today in this very important topic. Clearly, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, where I grew up, of course, in New Brunswick, and happy to be representing Nova Scotia here in Cumberland-Colchester. Our Premier here, Premier Houston, said the carbon tax is misguided and unfair. And we know, of course, very clearly that those of us who choose to live rurally suffer significant from the carbon tax. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about, sir, about the stories that you've heard from the New Brunswickers that you represent. Certainly, we know I'm getting stories every single day about the affordability problem. So if you could comment a bit about that, Premier, I appreciate that.
Well, certainly there's no question about that. We are a sparsely populated province. We don't have the mass transit systems. We don't have the subways. And the idea is that people use their vehicles every day to get to and from work. And so it has a greater impact on a province like ours, and it's a reality. So yes, we hear it every day when people spend more, and we have a greater demand every day to, well, how do we offset this high cost? How do we do this differently? And so that becomes the whole argument around the carbon tax. So when we say what it's actually achieving, 8% of the 1.5% of world emissions, it's saying we're taking a lot of hurt because of this ideological approach to emissions in the world, or climate change, and that we're really going to make a difference in Canada. And so I guess the point is, I just don't see the value in continuing to find a way to mitigate a very poor policy. And fighting this carbon tax is a reality. We know what people think across this country. They believe in climate change. We can provide a solution. The Prime Minister asked for a solution. I think I've outlined a real possibility here to make a major impact. And we're stuck on saying, no, carbon tax. But I'm sure that you're not getting that at any one of your ridings, because this affordability is real. When you stop at the pumps, when you go into grocery stores, when you go to lumber stores, when you buy anything that involves transportation, and getting to New Brunswick, transportation is in everything that we buy and sell. So I said the important part here is that let's face the reality of what it means to everyday people. And I'm saying 20 cents right now 17.6 off of the pumps immediately would be a real start. We're evaluating regulated pricing to see are we better off or without it. We've had it 20 years. But the idea is that we know 60 cents is coming. We know it's going to continue to get worse. So let's fix it now and make a difference and still impact the world emissions in a positive way.
Well, thank you very much for that, Premier. Very insightful on behalf of all your constituents out there. It's interesting, sir. You know, we talked a bit about the rebate, of course, that our Liberal colleagues want to say is so great. Do you think that we actually have an understanding of how much this actually costs every day people from New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, that the carbon tax, of course, as you mentioned, that it's applied to everything that we have that comes on via supply chains. Do you think we have a good understanding of exactly the unbelievable extent to which the carbon tax is hurting Atlantic Canadians and New Brunswickers in particular?
No, I do not. And then we talk about the isolated issue at the pump, and we're getting a rebate based on what you spend on fuel. Well, that isn't a rebate on groceries. That's not a rebate on hardware purchases or any other purchase. So I don't think, and there doesn't seem to be any discussion about that. So this idea that, you know, we increase, I think we've increased the numbers dramatically in the federal service in order to deliver on a circle program tax and circle back and think this is a solution. I mean, it's really has I think come to light as the prices go up. And this next one is we've had my colleagues in the government and in the opposition say, you know, we shouldn't do this because they're getting the same message I am. So these are, you know, certainly the Liberal leader here is saying the same thing. We shouldn't do this. So I think that's a pretty big message themselves. The Premier of Newfoundland said the same thing. We shouldn't do this. So if they didn't think that their own federal government was creating hardship in their province, would they be saying this? You can say, well, I might say it anyway. I'm not saying it anyway. I'm providing a solution to do something better.
Sorry, there was a point of order. Is that one I didn't quite hear? Sorry.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering about the use of props. I see something behind Mr. Ellis that could be in the prop category. Thank you.
What's up, Wade? How are you today, sir?
Be more specific. My eyes are probably not as strong as yours.
Well, I hate to use the sloganeering of our Conservative colleagues, but I see an axe the tax sign right behind him. So that would be inappropriate, I think, for the context of today.
Thanks. Doc Ellis, if you could just take that down before we proceed.
Well, actually, Chair, that sign may say axe worthy. It could say axe throwing. I'm sorry to hear that member wants to be triggered by that, but I happen to have a riding where the Nova Scotia Agricultural College is an incredible proponent of axe throwing. And therefore, I believe that that's appropriate for me to have that there. I'm not going to comment on the things behind Ms. Atwin. Maybe there's things I don't like there. Maybe there's something Mr. Savard Tremblay has on that I don't like. Maybe I don't like the color of his new jacket. I think that that's absolutely ridiculous. So axe throwing is a very important part of life here in Cumberland Colchester, and I thank the member from Fredericton for pointing that out. Premier, that being said, you know, it would appear that all of your Atlantic colleagues are speaking out against this and perhaps unanimously in the legislatures as well. And despite the fact of what the Liberals want, it appears very clear, sir, that you have some incredible ideas. And I want to thank you for your time here in committee today, your insightfulness, and your great representation of all New Brunswickers, of which my mom, who's 91, still lives in New Brunswick. And I thank you for that, sir.
Thank you.
Well, Chair, if you'd like to give me some more time, I'm quite happy to have that.
Sorry, we were just following up on the previous point of order. Thanks. We will now go to Mr. Long. Go ahead, sir.
Raw broadcast.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to my colleagues, and good morning to our Premier. It was great to see you, Blaine, this week at the New Brunswick Museum announcement. Great announcement for our city and certainly for the province. But Premier, why are you here today? Why are you before OGO that's studying main estimates? And I'm wondering if you can share with the committee when you were first approached to appear, actually before this committee or any committee. And I'm wondering if you can also table any documents about appearing before any committee here. So when were you approached to appear before OGO?
Well, we sent a letter some time ago, as you know, 7 of my colleagues, and
Hey, James, man, what's
about
going
this
on?
whole
Sorry, I missed
process,
you
or about the situation, how we felt collectively. And then from that point, we learned of this committee and the opportunity of looking at the costs of living in Canada and the fact of what the government is spending in terms of servicing the country, and the idea of having an opportunity to share exactly what we're seeing, I think is very relevant for us here in New Brunswick. But as I point out, it's relevant for colleagues from both sides of the table. And quite frankly, Mr. Long, you should be in the same camp with your colleagues provincially that are saying we shouldn't have this tax and this increase.
Well, Premier, let me give you an example. I had a guy come in my office the other day, and he was telling me about a 23-cent increase in fuel. And I said, no, it's not 23 cents.
Hello, I am
It's 23% of basically 9 cents. It's 3 cents. So then we went through the math, Premier, and he filled up his Honda Civic. It was 37 liters. It was about $1.20 extra to fill up his car, which he would actually drive for 2 weeks. He'd get 500 kilometers off that car. So in fact, it was 60 cents extra a week. Look, Premier, I mean, we're all very, very clear on your wanting to eliminate this price on pollution. So what is your solution, Premier? Can you share with the committee what you would do? Are you in favor of taxing large emitters and letting those emitters pass it on? Would that not be the same?
I think we had
What's up, Cowboy Sawmill? How are
very
you?
clear that I think our industries should be best in class in terms of emissions and emissions reductions, and continually investing to reduce them. What we know from every commodity, so I mean, let's put it clearly, every commodity, every industry, the cost of that industry into that commodity can end up at the consumer. So how do we change that? How do we make them all state owned? Do we decide that, you know, capitalism is no longer an issue here in Canada? And so we move more socialistic in nature?
But Premier, thank you for that. But again, I'm looking for specifics. Like what is New Brunswick's plan?
So
and will you be able to table? Would you be able to table a plan to reach our targets by 2050? I mean, I know you criticize this and you that, but I'm yet to hear your plan, Premier.
No, well, you weren't listening because I went through it in great detail here in the last 20 minutes. So it is very clear. It could be calculated as a major plan right here developed in New Brunswick that could have a major impact worldwide.
What's the plan?
Clear.
What is it?
It's developing our gas resource in that LNG plant that you and I both live close to, and saying we could ship to Europe and shut down coal plants. That's the plan. Simple. And it would create $3 billion worth of investment in St. John, and it would create multi-millions investment. It would be multi-million dollars to the First Nations, and it's doing exactly what is happening out west.
And that's how we're going to reduce emissions in our province by 2050.
Worldwide.
Premier,
we're not thinking big enough. We can't make the impact that we worldwide by the current closed thinking of just saying, what about Canada?
Premier, you talk often about affordability, and certainly we're on the same page. And look, I don't think there's any question that there's a challenge worldwide with respect to affordability. But you also have a lot of responsibility in the province of New Brunswick with respect to affordability. You've had 3 surpluses. I would argue largely due to federal transfers.
Who's getting excited to see Danielle
I also
Smith?
want to just, for the record, make sure that our committee and Canadians know that
she's got to be coming
almost
up
9
soon.
out of every 10 COVID support dollars that came into New Brunswick were federal. New Brunswick contributed to COVID relief less than any other province across Canada. But with respect to your surpluses and affordability, can you name me 3 things you have done, 3 actions you have taken to help New Brunswickers with respect to affordability? Thank you.
So let's talk about
sorry,
COVID.
before you, Premier Higgs, sorry, we're almost out of time, so a very brief answer if you're able to, please.
Well, I was going to start on the COVID question. We spent every dime that the federal government gave to us went to COVID, and as did other provinces, I assume. But we also added to that where it was needed. But I would also point out we had one of the best records on COVID in the country, working with our colleagues at Atlantic Canada. So
are you
again,
able to?
Thank you, gentlemen, both. Sorry, we are
Enzo,
out of
how are
time.
you? What's going on, man?
Mr. Savard
Welcome to
Tremblay,
the chat.
please go ahead. And Ignore what Dr. Ellis says. I think your jacket is perfect.
Well, I didn't hear any disparaging comments about my jacket. I'd like us to revisit the minutes after this meeting. But Mr. Premier Higgs, tell me, you said earlier concerning funding that you'd like to see greater funding for Anglophone school boards. How is that an issue with allocations from the federal government? Why isn't the onus on you to change your education system and funding thereof?
Yeah, I'm sorry if that was
Roxy, what's up?
What you got from my message.
We've seen you here before.
It is
It's
a provincial
fun.
responsibility,
Glad you're back to check it out.
what my point was I would like to see a greater results from our schools, greater results in our ability for kids to speak both languages. We are a bilingual province after all, but our performance really hasn't improved in that regard much in the 50 years of trying to learn a second language. Our education in the English schools, about 30% graduate being bilingual, 70% don't. So you'd say, if we were a bilingual province, how could that be our record after 50 years? And then the challenge too, we know we have the challenges in literacy and numeracy, and so that's an ongoing challenge, as well as other activities in the school that we're just trying to manage. We know that teachers are going to make the difference in all that, and finding a way for teachers' voices to be heard is a solution. So that was my point earlier. If that wasn't clear, that's what I was trying to put across.
Thank you. Now tell me, I'm curious, just to clarify, the 65 cents on the litre, where did you come up with that figure? That means that each litre of gas would amount to 1% of a tonne of gas. So a big vehicle that filled up its tank would emit a tonne? Is that what you're asserting there?
About 10 seconds to respond, Premier Higgs.
So the point is, and on the fill up, so going where we are just keeps adding up, and right today the 23%, would make a difference in cars that would be 20 to say a new car filling up right now would be $10 more on a 50 liter of gas. Looking at where this is headed by 2030, bigger vehicles $600, a minivan $450, an SUV $420, and a sedan $400. So the point of the 62 cents is that at 37.5 will be carbon tax, 17 cents will be clean fuel standards, and there's 8 cents on that's an HST, which gives you 63 cents
Thank
by
you, Premier
2030.
Higgs. We are just trying to keep to our schedule so we can get you out on time. Back to you, Mr. Bachrach, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Premier Higgs, you've talked at length about this idea of selling gas to Europe as part of Canada's contribution to global climate change. I'm wondering about the business case for New Brunswick specifically. You're talking about building massive amounts of infrastructure, shipping the gas across the ocean, and selling it to European countries. Are those European markets that you're hoping to sell New Brunswick LNG to, are they projected to have increasing demand for such gas?
Yes, they are indeed. Like we have a couple MOUs. We've had different countries that have asked us, we would sign a 20-year agreement for supply, and so there's no shortage of demand. And when I was in Europe, they said that we can't believe Canada's not providing any energy solution for our needs here. And the point of us building, you'd say the infrastructure, we already have an LNG plant here in Eastern Canada. It's an LNG import. It can be converted to an LNG export for around $2 to $3 billion. And Repsol were prepared to do that, but they need a gas supply. We have gas in the province. We have pipelines that are already connecting this gas supply. So it's a matter of developing them and utilizing, we all need to be on site. First Nations need to be part of this for sure. But in a very moderate expansion, on the First Nations communities in New Brunswick, it could have an impact of anywhere between 800 million and 1.6 billion. And that's just on a very modest expansion of wells that are already in place in the southern part of the province, southwestern.
But thinking long-term, Premier, is the analysis that you're getting showing that there is increasing demand for gas in those European markets?
Yes, it's showing that the absolutely hydrogen is 50 before it's any impact.
No, not hydrogen.
I know,
natural gas.
But my point is there isn't an alternative. That was where I was going with that. There isn't an alternative.
Okay, just back to my original question, because you said, yes, you have analysis that shows that there's increasing demand for natural gas in European markets. Can you table that analysis with the committee?
So let's put it this way. Let's put the facts. I could sign tomorrow a 20-year agreement with a country in Europe for gas supply. Today?
And which country is that?
Czech Republic was one. We've had others that have. When I was there was the Czech Republic. We've had others that have shown interest, and other countries like U.S. are building. Germany's another because they've built a lot of LNG import facilities. They are building this infrastructure, and they did it in record time. If you looked at the stats, you'd see they put these up in months.
I apologize, Premier. That is our time. We'll have to move on to our last two rounds. Our last two interventions will be 5-minute interventions. We have Mr. Halan, and then it will be Mr. Kuzmierczuk. Go ahead, Mr. Halan.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Premier Higgs, for being here. You've joined 70% of Canadians and 6 other premiers, including a Liberal Premier, Andrew Furey, to call on this Liberal NDP government to spike the hike on April the 1st that will raise the carbon tax 23%, making the cost of everything more expensive. Can you please explain to this committee why you're calling on this and why it's so important to spike the hike?
Well, it's like putting a needle in. I guess you keep doing a little bit at a time, and you think, well, it doesn't hurt that bad, so I can stand it. And then all of a sudden, you look back and you say, I've added 60 cents a liter to gas. At what point do you bring this thing to reality? So, the analysis done earlier said, well, it's only going to be 60 cents on a fill up. Well, currently, with the 17.6 cents, and where we are right now, it relies to an extra $10 on the total carbon tax to date. But then you keep moving that along to the 60 cents, it becomes more and more relevant. So you're at some point, you bring it up and say, okay, when are we going to realize that this is a punitive tax, not achieving the big picture results, and we think we're saving the world on climate change.
Maureen, how are you guys today?
That's
Thanks
the
for
point.
joining the chat.
We are
Just watching
causing impact, negative impact on every citizen. So you can argue with me, or you can look at across the country and see 7 provinces that are saying this is a problem. And you can say, well, what can we do about it? And 7 provinces that are represented by, different parties, that this is a problem. So at some point, you'd like to think there would be an ear to hear this and say, all right, yeah, we're getting deeper now. It's costing more now. It's not just about another 3 cents in April. It's about all of the cumulative effect of increased cost of energy, and particularly in provinces that have no other alternative.
The PBO once again reiterated yesterday that the carbon tax is has a net negative impact on families. Can you talk a little bit more to the negative impact it's playing on families in New Brunswick?
Well, to me, the issue becomes calculating the full spectrum of what it means to have higher energy costs. We've seen costs go up in every sector, and the grocery stores particularly that have gone up, in building supplies gone up. And so our inflationary costs have gone up. So we're seeing a little change in inflation rates, so let's hope that continues to drop. In New Brunswick, we've seen assessments go up dramatically, but we've had a population growth here for the first time in many years, so it's had an impact. But the cost of housing is preventing more houses being built, and so people just look and say, well, is the government going to come up with a solution here to solve the problem? Well, let's focus on the problem. Let's get back to the policies that are creating a problem, or certainly having a major impact on making it worse, rather than try to pretend we should put Band-Aids on in order to mitigate just a poor policy.
This Liberal NDP government consistently says Canada is the problem. Premier Higgs, can you please let this Liberal NDP government know how Canada can be the solution and why it's not the problem?
Yes, I did. And what I was saying earlier is about what we're seeing in BC and Alberta with export of energy and natural gas. What we can do in the East Coast is the very same thing, is export with natural gas and LNG. And the issue is that is a climate
Hi, Devin.
action.
How are you? What's
that
up?
mitigates the affordability challenge because the revenue would be used both for offsetting costs for people in the province, and it would be used for technology development. When we develop the technology, people are going to be more acute, more astute about how they can manage and reduce their emissions. You know, we talk about the electric cars. We're not able to cope with electric car productions or the battery productions to meet the requirements for 2035. And so the point is, let's have a realistic plan to transition through this time period, but let's use our resources to pay for it rather than everybody's home, everybody's pocket. Let the resources pay for the change that we all know we must.
Thank you, Premier. My last question is, the Governor of the Bank of Canada clearly stated that 0.6 of the overall inflation number in Canada today is contributed by this carbon tax scam. 0.6. And if we got rid of it, it would put a massive dent in inflation that might help to lower the interest rates faster. And after we've seen this government double the cost of mortgages and houses and rents. Can you please tell us how important it is to axe this tax on housing?
Well, I think that
very brief.
It's very important. I mean, to look at all these taxes that are being put on buildings, on the issues of fuel, of the issues of commodities, it all flows into higher costs. So I think that we just need to rethink our program and what we can do in the world to have the greatest impact.
Thank you, Premier Higgs. Mr. Kuzmierczak for 5, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Premier, for being here with us here today and for answering our questions and shedding light on your plan and New Brunswick's plan for to address climate change. I find it interesting that yesterday and today we will have 3 premiers testifying here before us. 3 premiers that over the last 4 years have all dealt with record-setting forest fires. And you look at, for example, Saskatchewan, for example, saw 494 fires and about 2 million hectares that were burnt last year in Saskatchewan. And obviously we heard from the Premier yesterday. Alberta last year had 2.2 million hectares burnt in Alberta. It was the greatest forest fires that province has seen, 1,121 wildfires that claimed 2.2 million hectares that were burnt. City of Edmonton had recorded 299 smoke hours last year. So the residents of Edmonton had to deal with 299 smoke hours. Again, a record far and away. And of course, your own province has seen record forest fires in 2020. Premier, what is your plan? What is your climate plan?
So, once again, my climate plan is to have a bigger impact on world emissions. I think it sounds like here that many of you are going to be surprised if we reach our 1.8% target and those conditions you just outlined are better. Because
Premier Higgs, what is your plan for New Brunswick? What is I understand you've got a global plan. What is your plan for New Brunswick?
We continue to reduce. We're well ahead of targets in New Brunswick for emission reduction. Well ahead of targets. And we continue to push in that direction to meet the targets that are put forward. So that's the plan. When you want to talk about, so that is on target. In relation to forest fire, I do want to point out something. So forest industry is hugely, it's a big issue for New Brunswick. We're #1 in Canada for forest products and a GDP per capita. Our 900 companies directly in the forestry sector, 24,000 full-time jobs. Now, the reason I'm saying all that is not only to identify the economic benefit, but to identify the benefit of managing forests. in many cases, the reasons that forests we have climate change, we have drier conditions. No one is denying any of that. But when you let old forests...
Premier, I do apologize, but I'm not hearing a plan here. I'm just hearing words here. And Mr. Chair, I am going to share my time with my colleague, Ms. Atwin, as well, too. And so I'll just pass my questions over to her.
Bible Vibes,
thanks, Ms. Atwin. You have 2 minutes.
Hello, Rob Duchin.
Sure, thank you,
What's
Mr.
up? Hello,
Smartcheck.
Dynasty.
And Premier Higgs, we'll just kind of pick up on a piece you mentioned about the forestry sector, for example. I know that we have sustained use of aerial spraying of glyphosate in the province, which has actually created a monoculture in our forestry sector, which could actually lead to more susceptible conditions for forest fires. So to point to that as kind of a big piece of that plan is concerning to me. You also mentioned, Indigenous communities and the potential for, natural gas exploration. I would remind you that there were significant demonstrations and protests across the country or across the province during that time because it wasn't something that Indigenous communities wanted in their backyard. So has that relationship changed at all? I'd like some insight on that piece.
I would think the reality is starting to set in that this is a huge economic benefit. It's done across the country, particularly in BC and in Alberta and Saskatchewan. But the idea that the development of natural gas is not new. It's well established. The impact it can have in world emissions, it's well established. And yes, I'd like to think the First Nations are learning more about this so they understand economically and environmentally what it can mean. So that is the process that is underway. But we could certainly make an impact with the federal government being part of that. But I want to go back to the forestry comment and the glyphosate. The biggest use of glyphosate is in farming and agriculture.
But we're talking about forestry sector.
Yeah. Well, you can't isolate one without the other. It might be easier to talk about forestry right now, but the whole point
aerial spraying
is mostly in agriculture and in the forestry sector. I want to point out the fact that...
Does it not create monocultures, though, that make our forests more susceptible to forest fires?
Having...
And threaten biodiversity, which should be part of any climate plan?
Let me answer. It was my question, was it not?
Well, it's my time, actually, sir.
All right, your time and my answer then.
Sure,
the idea is that we have the lowest law in Canada for land lost by fire. And that is, we're number one in Canada for forest products. I said that, but we are also recognized leader in forest fire protection. And the reason for that is because we have not only a quick attack unit in order to mitigate their loss.
Sorry, Premier, I need to wrap up, please.
Okay. But we have actually an active forest management system and harvesting. Old forests are not being allowed just to rot and become fire traps.
Thank you very much. That is our time. Premier Higgs, thank you very much. We will suspend for a few minutes to bring in our next witness.
I'm not sure what they're going to do for this suspension.
Thanks, everyone.
I think they're going to just delay it a couple of minutes and float back in, and it's going to be Danielle Smith now. I think that's what they're teeing up. Here. So we're just getting to the next piece, guys. Oh, yes, we do have Danielle Smith, and she is up. Sorry, guys, I don't mean to make it, build it up too much. Come on, CPAC. Here we go.
Time for that. I know how important that is to you. I'm here on behalf of Albertans and Canadians who are struggling with severe financial pressures. They're increasingly desperate because they're facing a cost of living crisis not seen in decades. Over the last 2 years, inflation and high interest rates have driven up prices on everything from food to gas to housing, things that Albertans rely on every single day. Families are being forced to make tough choices just to put food on the table. Businesses are having to make sacrifices to keep the lights on. Social services are under intense strain as more and more people reach out for help, many for the first time in their lives. Albertans and all Canadians need common sense, compassion, and responsible government to prevail. That's why I'm urging you today to heed the calls of Canadians across the country and suspend the increase in the carbon tax on April 1st. The carbon tax has contributed to and worsened Canadian stress and financial pain. Despite the federal government's claims that Canadians benefit from rebates, the carbon tax on a net basis will cost Albertans more than $900 this year if the tax is implemented. The federal government's own parliamentary budget officer has also said that the cost to each Albertan will more than triple in the next 6 years to a staggering expense of $2,700 net by 2030 to 2031. This isn't just reckless, it's immoral, and it's inhumane. And the added pressure will ruin countless lives, futures, and dreams. It's a weight that Canadians can't bear. And that's why Alberta has been calling on the federal government to eliminate the carbon tax since 2019. Let me repeat what I've said many times before. We understand the importance of achieving carbon neutrality, and we can manage it together as a nation without punishing everyday Albertans. We've demonstrated as much in Alberta, where we are making significant strides towards reducing emissions. And we're doing it without compromising jobs and hurting the industries that have created so much wealth and prosperity for our country, and which will continue to do so if the federal government would just let them. Our province has a long history of climate action, with more than 2 decades of programs and policies that have led emissions reductions and inspired other jurisdictions to follow our lead. Provinces and territories must be able to create emissions reduction plans that reflect their distinct needs and priorities. Alberta's industries are steadily lowering emissions with new technology and investment, even as they compete with foreign suppliers who ignore the need to improve their own performance. And things don't have to be this way. We can effectively reduce emissions without punishing Canadians for trying to stay warm or drive to work or school or a medical appointment. Alberta's already doing it through our carbon trading market. It's the technology innovation and emissions reduction regulation, just launched actually on NGX this month, and through our emissions reduction and energy development plan, which I released last April. The only thing the federal carbon tax is achieving is higher costs. And in fact, Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault did say it would take until 2060 for it to have an impact. As of April 1st, Albertans will pay around 35 cents in federal taxes for every liter of fuel, along with the carbon tax that also includes the federal excise tax and the GST, which is a tax on tax. The price of natural gas, which Albertans rely on, will also be affected by the carbon tax increase. The carbon tax increase on natural gas is going up to $4.09 a gigajoule, which is more than double the base price of natural gas, which today stands at about $1.72 a gigajoule. The so-called solutions the federal government is to increase the carbon tax on something that is life or death for Albertans in the extreme cold of winter. And I will say that is, again, inhumane. It begs the question, how far will the federal government go to make life even more difficult and expensive when so many Canadians are already struggling? Alberta municipalities, schools, and healthcare providers are telling us that they need to make cuts and borrow from elsewhere in their budgets just to accommodate the upcoming carbon tax increase. And yet we hear repeatedly that affordability remains a top federal priority. So I'm calling on the federal government to match words with actions. This means working with the provinces to ease Canadians' burdens and strengthen the Canadian economy. Serious challenges like affordability and emissions demand serious responses, and an increased federal carbon tax is nothing of the sort. And Canadians don't want it. You only need to look across the country to see premiers across party lines, 7 of us, and the people they represent stand up against it. If the federal government wants to protect Canadians' quality of life, it should step up and cancel the carbon tax increase immediately. At the very least, the federal government should apply policy equally across the country. We've heard the Quebec representative say several times that Quebec does not pay the fuel tax. And we also would like to see an exemption on all forms of home heating, not just ones that are centered in Atlantic Canada and on a particular type of fuel. It must do this for the sake of fairness for all Canadians. The people of this country deserve nothing less. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Premier Smith. We'll start with Mr. Halland. Before we do, though, just to keep on time and respect the Premier's time, we're going to stay exact to our timing. I will cut off on the right on the 6 and 5 minute mark, so please watch your time. Mr. Halland, go ahead, please. Thank you.
I'll just start off by saying how I feel it's very shameful for the finance chair, Peter Fonseca, that went into hiding as soon as the premiers came calling to call a meeting on their request. Premier, thank you for being here, and thank you for joining 70% of Canadians and 6 other premiers, including a Liberal premier, in telling this Liberal NDP government to spike the hike on the road to axing the tax by a common-sense Conservative government. The PBO once again reconfirmed that families are at a net loss on average because of this carbon tax scam. For example, in Alberta, a family will pay $2,900 into this carbon tax scam, and according to the finance minister herself, she said that families, and she was bragging that Alberta families get $1,800 in rebates, and that somehow Albertans should be grateful for this. Premier, can you please tell Canadians the human toll that this carbon tax scam puts on Albertan families so that the Liberals can understand the real pain it causes?
Well, I can tell you a couple of things. The way I think most Albertans look at it is the government is taking $1 and promising to give back 75 cents. And everybody knows that that's not a good deal. We've seen in the polling that people don't support the increase. They don't support the tax. And I can tell you an MNP report from October 2023 showed that 51% of Canadians are $200 or less away from being unable to meet their financial obligations. We also find that in Alberta, people are more likely to say that their level of debt is concerning to them, 51%, and that they are worried about their ability to repay their debts, 71%. So we took a number of affordability measures in order to be able to offset these costs over the last number of years. Foregone revenue of $7 billion. In fact, I'd be happy to itemize it if the member would like to ask me about it. But we are now at a point where we have to run a balanced budget as well. And we're just asking for the federal government to recognize that it's their turn to do their part to ease the affordability crisis.
Thank you, Premier. As you mentioned, in Atlantic Canada, when their Liberal MPs were revolting because their poll numbers were tanking, Atlantic Canada got a carve-out. Alberta got no such carve-out, just like the rest of Canada. Do you feel this is just another blatant attack on Alberta?
Look, I know that the question has been raised about the Supreme Court decision on the carbon tax, and I believe that the Supreme Court decided in favor of the government on that because they were making the argument that it was such an important national issue, it needed to be dealt with in a national way, and the rules needed to apply equally across the country. And yet we've heard the Quebec members say that they don't pay a carbon tax. We have heard as well that in Atlantic Canada, the most polluting home heating fuel, in fact, which is home heating oil, now has a reprieve for 3 years. Meanwhile, many of the provinces in the West made the decision years ago to switch to cleaner burning natural gas, and we're getting punished for it. So I would just appeal to this committee that if you want to apply the carbon tax, it has to be applied equally across the country in all provinces for all types of fuel. And if you're not going to apply it that way, then you need to give a reprieve across the country so that everybody is treated fairly. I think it's creating a national unity crisis, and I do believe that it's the obligation of the members around this table representing all parties to ensure fairness in the way each citizen is treated in the country if they have the mandate to do so.
Chair, I'm just going to raise a point of order. And
Sure.
Go
ahead, Mr.
My sincere
Naqvi.
apologies to the Premier. I don't want to be disrespectful. I think yesterday, I see Mr. Hallen has a prop on his computer. Yesterday, you deemed that to be a prop, so I would just suggest that if he can not display that while he's on the screen, I'll appreciate it because that's...
Sure.
Yeah.
I can't see from the angle I'm at, but, oh, yes. Mr. Naqvi has a point, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you, sir.
Too bad the Liberals are triggered by a sticker once again. Premier, when you talk about national unity crisis, I think of Stephen Guilbeault, who, as far as I know, is the only minister that has been in handcuffs and in an orange jumpsuit. Can you please speak a little bit about how dangerous his ideology is when it comes to our clean, responsible, low-carbon energy sector for Alberta and Canada's prosperity?
I should just make sure the committee knows exactly why Stephen Guilbeault faced law problems. One was for the stunt he pulled on the CN Tower. The other was that he climbed on the roof of our Premier, Ralph Klein, when his wife Colleen was home, terrifying her. So you can imagine how Albertans feel that this is the person now responsible for enacting emissions policy. I would say that we've been able to work constructively with the federal government on a number of areas. They have worked with us on establishing a net zero petrochemical plant with Dow Chemical, a net zero hydrogen plant with Air Products. We're in the process of getting to the final finish line on a net zero cement plant with Heidelberg. They've worked with us on de Havilland to make sure that we've got water bombers being built, not only in our province, but will also help the rest of the country. So I don't want to say that it's uniformly negative, but the spirit of cooperative federalism means that you do not take unilateral action in an area of provincial jurisdiction. It means that you work collaboratively. And I think the court has chastised the federal government, led by, in this area, Stephen Guilbeault, on 2 occasions for that, the Impact Assessment Act, as well as the plastics ban. The approach that I would like to see them take is to work collaboratively with us the way we have, not come through with a cap on a particular industry, oil and gas emissions, which they have announced, or a cap on methane, which they have announced, which will disproportionately impact our province. Their proposal for a net zero power grid outside the Constitution under Section 92 and clearly demonstrates they don't understand how our electricity market works. Net zero vehicles, having 20% vehicles being sold by 2026, we know that that will simply kill our auto sector.
Premier,
and reduce our ability.
I apologize. I have to ask you to wrap up.
Of course, those are just some examples, and not to mention that the minister doesn't seem to want to build roads. It's like he hasn't ever left downtown Montreal. It's a big country.
Thank you very much, Premier. Thank you, Mr. Helland. Mr. Sousa, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and Premier, appreciate you being here, and I apologize for those earlier points of order. As you can appreciate, a Conservative chair brought you here without consultation of this committee to talk about main estimates, but now we're talking about something else completely different, which is meant for the Finance Committee. And yesterday we put forward a motion, the last motion, which the Conservative chair did not allow us to pass. He adjourned, which made it very clear what the will of the committee was, notwithstanding the misinterpretation of an earlier motion. So I just wanted to preface that by saying to you that we appreciate you being here, but we also recognize the politics involved and the partisanship that's taking place. And can you advise us, when were you contacted to appear before this committee?
Sure, I was contacted. We wrote a letter on March the 26th asking to appear before the Finance Committee.
No, the OGO Committee. When were you approached to approach
correct.
OGO?
After we'd written our letter, we were approached on the same day, March the 26th, to appear before the committee.
Thank you for that. Another item is the notion of reducing emissions in Canada, reducing emissions across all provinces, trying to make Canada competitive. You reaffirm very eloquently the initiatives that are being taken, not just in the province of Alberta, but everywhere, in respect to trying to be innovative, the green economy, to do things concurrently. We are still a big oil and gas country. We still net a lot of revenue and recognize the importance of that export. We also recognize the importance of making it cleaner where possible to get it through. And those are important initiatives. I worked out in Calgary for many years in the early 80s, as did many of those from out east, to work out west. And I appreciate the industry. However, for our kids' sake, for your sake, for all of our sake, we want to make Canada even better, notwithstanding. And in Ontario, where I had the privilege of representing for some months, years, I should say, as Minister of Finance, we also brought in the cap-and-trade system. Similar to Quebec, we're part of the Western Climate Initiative to be exempt from the federal alternative, to be competitive and reinvest dollar for dollar into innovative industries while again being competitive. We have cement plants, we have a lot of things, as do you in Alberta, and you do trade. You've talked about some of the credits that you take advantage of, and Ontario was netting 1.5 billion or so in net earnings to be reinvested. And then a Conservative government came in and did away with that to pick a fight with Justin Trudeau, the Premier or the Prime Minister, on carbon tax when it was unnecessary. And here we have an opportunity to do things. I need to understand the incentive now that Alberta has been taking to innovate and bring forward all of these great reductions to emissions. Why are you doing that?
Well, I should say that we showed leadership back in 2007 by setting the first price on carbon, I believe, in North America. And we've continued with our industrial carbon pricing ever since. It's been renamed to the Technology Innovation and Emissions Reduction program. And the way it works is that industry is expected to be able to meet a certain standard. If they are above that standard, they pay into the fund. And then we use the fund to be able to reduce emissions elsewhere. So since 2009, we have seen over $2 billion invested through emissions reduction Alberta.
Yeah, those are fantastic. Why not expand it further? Like, why did you not take it a step further? Because we all recognize the importance of pricing carbon. Do you believe pollution should be free?
We have taken it further. We have asked for a recognition from ECCC to be able to acknowledge our tier program as being equivalent, and they did until 2030. And so we part of the way we did that is that we matched our increases with the federal increases. So by 2030, it'll go up to $170 on industrial emissions. We're talking today about retail emissions, and I look at those as being two totally different things.
And I understand. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Sorry.
No, it's my time.
I also just want to say we also expanded it to include more. We included anyone under 2,000. My apologies.
No, I appreciate what you're saying. And we do offer rebates as a result of the consumer spending so that they get more than they receive. About 8 out of 10 families get that benefit. On another note, in Ontario, we also were looking at providing a Ontario pension plan to supplement the Canada pension plan, to add to it. And the whole intent was to enhance CPP to make it even stronger. It's also a matter of unity. It's a matter of protecting all Canadians. You spoke at the start of talking about Albertans and Canadians for the nation's benefit. Can you explain what benefit there is to Albertans by withdrawing from CPP, creating more costs, and putting at risk their retirement?
Well, there is a formula in the Act that was insisted upon by Ontario, so that if Ontario ever wanted to get out of the Canada Pension Plan, there would be clear rules for how to do that. We applied that methodology and found that every year Albertans pay more in premiums than they get back in benefits. With that invested over time, it has grown to about $334 billion that we would be entitled to based on the formula in the Act. I think it's important for all Albertans to know, and also all Canadians to know, just how unbalanced Confederation is, just how much Alberta does pay into Confederation.
When Ontario was a so-called have-not province, it still provided $11 billion more to the rest of the Federation than it received, whereas other provinces, and that has happened with Alberta, but it's a national unity issue. It's about protecting Canadians. It's also about protecting Albertans for their future retirement. Before I let you go, can you document the times that you were called upon to come to this committee so that we can have that report back as well?
Cool spot.
Certainly, it was just the one time, and we said yes immediately.
Thanks. That is our time. Mr. Savard-Tremblay, please, for 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson and Premier. Good afternoon or good morning. Thank you for your presentation. When it comes to overall federal spending, well, oftentimes there's encroachment, tramping on provincial areas of jurisdiction.
Translation setting on my end. My apologies.
Sorry, Mr. Savard-Tremblay. We'll pause the time and check for interpretation.
Testing one. Testing 1 2 3. This is the English channel. Testing 1 2 3. This is the English channel. Testing 1 2 3. This is the English channel.
There's a little globe icon.
Yeah, there might be a little globe button at the bottom for interpretation. Bottom of your screen for Zoom.
Original audio English. Listen in English.
Perfect.
Let me just see if that works. Sorry, I'm new to the simultaneous translation. I hope that works.
Testing 1 2 3.
Set your time and start again, Mr. Tremblay, or Savard-Tremblay, please.
Oui. Alors, vous me permettez de recommencer.
If I may start from scratch, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Excellent. Good. Well, good morning, Premier, and thank you for your presentation. When it comes to federal spending, there's often encroachment and trampling on provincial areas of jurisdiction. You enacted an Alberta Sovereignty Act. And as a member of the Bloc Québécois, I'm quite sympathetic to that notion. I'm fighting for the complete independence of my nation. And I want to know what motivated you. What was the root cause of this? Is it because the Constitution was being flouted? Was the spending encroaching on your areas of jurisdiction? What kind of interference prompted you to do this?
Mostly it's been the various legal actions we've had to take against the federal government. We've had a victory on the Impact Assessment Act, which you know is Bill C-69. We had a success initially on the declaration of plastics being toxic, also deemed to be unconstitutional. But I can tell you my Justice Department is very busy. We have about 14 different actions that we are going to be taking against the federal government for various ways in which they're interfering with our jurisdiction. If you read the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act, so I don't share your aspiration on separation. We just believe that the Constitution should be abided, that the Constitution was written in a way that gives sovereign powers to the provincial levels of government and sovereign powers to the federal levels of government, and talks about the need for cooperative federalism, that the federal government cannot interfere in an area of provincial jurisdiction unilaterally. And I think that's being borne out with some of the court decisions they've now lost.
Thank you. Sorry about the lag. It's so that I can hear the interpretation. Well, listen, I know that we don't necessarily share the same aspirations.
Hello, KCI.
We didn't sign the Constitution in Quebec. At the very least, we'd like it to be upheld. That would be at least something. But the fact is that we would like the Constitution to be upheld and that there be no encroachments that fly in the face of the Constitution. Now, as far as federal spending is concerned, there are oftentimes programs that involve encroachment, and in the last budget there are new taxes that are again a trampling on provincial jurisdiction. Sometimes programs are introduced which on the surface ostensibly aren't encroachment on provincial areas of jurisdiction but open the door to such meddling. Do you have misgivings about that kind of approach?
We certainly do, and in one way we've been inspired by Quebec, by your premier, in some of the policies that he has established to establish guardrails around provincial jurisdiction. In particular, one of the things we like to emulate is that if there is an area of federal encroachment using the spending power, we've observed that Quebec has particular success at being able to opt out and be able to receive the full compensation. And that is a strategy that we have started to employ and will continue to do that.
So, if I could paraphrase you, you would like more power for Alberta, more areas of jurisdiction, and if so, which, please?
We would certainly like for our full area of constitutional jurisdiction to be respected. I recognize that the federal government's responsible for military, for international trade agreements, for international agreements, even like those signed at the COP meetings, for passports, for immigration, for currency. There are some areas that are concurrent that we would like to be able to collaborate on, like immigration, but I don't have any interest on encroaching on any of those areas. In fact, if I tried to set up my own currency or establish my own passport office, then people would say, that's crazy, that's federal jurisdiction. I think people should say exactly the same thing when the federal government encroaches on our jurisdiction. They should say, you can't do that. The Constitution doesn't allow it. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that it works both ways, and we're trying to assert that it should.
Well, were passports to be within your purview, well, obviously the results wouldn't be worse than we've seen in Ottawa in recent times. But that said, it's my understanding that Quebec's model is one that you may wish to emulate. I know that previously there were individuals such as Stephen Harper who wrote a letter stating that Quebec was his role model, and that in Alberta you'd like the same kind of framework. So it's an inspiration for you, Quebec?
It is. Let me just give a recent example. I noticed that your premier asked to be able to choose 100% of newcomers coming to his province through the provincial nominee program. I would like that same aspiration. We have been home to 57,000 evacuees from Ukraine. Many of them are using our provincial nominee program. And instead of increasing the amount of provincial nominees that we've asked for to 20,000, the federal government reduced them. So I think that's a violation, quite frankly, of Section 95 of the Constitution, which gives us concurrent jurisdiction. And we'll be pressing that. And perhaps Quebec would like to work with us on that.
Thank you very much. That is our time. Mr. Bachrach, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Premier Smith, for being with us. Maybe I'll pick up where my Bloc colleague just left off. You mentioned that Quebec is an inspiration to Alberta, and Quebec has taken a different approach to this whole issue of carbon pricing, the only province in Canada to be part of a cap and trade or a carbon market with, I believe, California and Washington. Is that something that Alberta has looked to participate in as an alternative to the federal backstop?
I think that we have our own program. If I understand the Quebec program, there's 172 industrial outfits that operate under their cap and trade system. I believe actually ours is more expansive. I'm not sure of the total number, but we did have large emitters that were under the program. We just recently reduced the threshold so that anyone who emits, I believe it's more than 2,000 megatons a year, can also participate in our emissions reduction program. So if they are able to do better than the average in their industry, they will generate credits. Those credits can then be sold so that they can turn it into a revenue stream. So yes, we've modeled our industrial program similarly to Quebec. At the moment, it is just internal to trade within Alberta, but it has been advocated to me that we should be looking at ways of expanding it.
So you would look like, for instance, if you participated in the same carbon market as Quebec, then this whole issue of the carbon tax wouldn't be an issue for Albertans. It's not an issue for Quebecers because they're part of a different system that they've signed up for. Are you currently looking at whether to participate in that same system?
No, we won't participate in that system because, quite frankly, we transfer enough money to Ottawa that then gets spent in equalization to Quebec. So we're not looking for another way of transferring dollars out of Alberta to Quebec. What we are interested in doing is finding ways of generating our own offsets through our investment in Dow Chemical, Petrochemical, which is net zero, Air Products, hydrogen, which is net zero, Heidelberg net zero cement. We also are keen to work with the federal government on establishing an ammonia market so that we would be able to reduce emissions internationally. Article 6 has been mentioned by previous premiers. If we could simply reduce China's reliance on coal by 20%, that would offset all of the emissions of all of Canada. We also have geothermal that we are investing in. We just launched our very first competitive hydrogen fueling station, and we'll be building out our hydrogen infrastructure. We've partnered with the federal government on dual fuel vehicles for long haul. We've partnered with the federal government on hydrogen buses. So those are the kind of ways that we want to generate our own credits that can be used to offset our emissions so that we can get to net zero by 2050. At some point, once that market is more developed, perhaps we would look at having those emissions credits traded more broadly, but at the moment we're keeping it as an internal market.
So you mentioned Article 6 and this idea that we can get some sort of credits for our exports, even when those products are consumed in other jurisdictions. And Canada does export some clean products. However, we also export some products that aren't so clean, including thermal coal. Should the impact of burning thermal coal in other jurisdictions also count against our domestic emissions?
Well, I can tell you we don't export thermal coal, as I understand. I think that's mostly British Columbia that does that.
I'm not saying Alberta, but I'm saying Canada, because of course Article 6 would apply on a national basis, I believe. Correct?
Well, you actually have the ability under Section 6.2 as a subnational government to also go and negotiate those kinds of partnerships. I can tell you how South Korea and Japan and India are looking at it. Since they do have a large coal fleet, they're looking at dual combustion. So if we can apply either hydrogen or ammonia so it can be combusted at the same time, that reduces the overall emissions profile. And if there's a way for us to export those products and then get joint credit, whether it's 50-50 or whether they take 80% and we take 20%, we think that that's good for the planet. We think that that would be the way that we would make the largest reduction in emissions globally.
But I guess my question still stands. Should we not also be, should our exports of dirty products also be accounted for in the same way that our export of clean products are?
Look, it's a global market and it's a global problem, and we have to reduce global emissions. And the way I look at it is that if we can live up to the spirit of what we signed on to in COP28, which recognizes natural gas as a transition fuel, a vitally important transition fuel, then we'll be able to reduce the overall global emissions profile. I can tell you what countries like South Korea and Japan and others tell us is that if they can't get those long-term supplies of things like LNG or ammonia, then they're just going to have more unabated coal that they bring on stream, which will actually increase overall emissions. So I would say that if we, in the spirit of looking at this as a global problem, understanding that there are interim measures that need to be taken, it seems to me that those are the kind of things that we should be partnering with our friends and allies on.
So you mentioned COP28 and the Paris Agreement. Do you support Canada remaining in the Paris Agreement?
Yes.
And the Paris Agreement predominantly is focused on reducing domestic emissions. You mentioned Article 6, but at this point, Article 6 hasn't been used to provide credits for the export of energy products from our country. The largest part of the Paris Agreement is reducing domestic emissions. And in that challenge, we have a plan put forward by the government that you take issue with. Have you tabled an alternative proposal, as the Prime Minister has suggested, that would contribute to meeting the requirements of the Paris Agreement?
Yes.
Very brief answer. I apologize, Premier.
Sure. My very first conversation with the Prime Minister was to tell him we were aligning with a 2050 target like our allies, and that I would produce an emissions reduction and energy development plan, which I did last April. And we've been working on a number of tables for how we will work on achieving some of those interim steps.
Thank you, Premier.
Thank you very much. Ms. Goodridge, please, for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Premier for taking your time here today to stand up for Albertans. We've seen now the country, Germany, Japan, and most recently Greece come asking the Prime Minister about LNG, and unfortunately his answer every single time seems to be there's no business case. I don't think he's correct. Can you give a bit of a snapshot as to what LNG would mean for our province?
I can tell you what it would mean for our country, what it would mean for our partner British Columbia as well, what it would mean for First Nations who are increasingly developing LNG export facilities. We've been very supportive of our Indigenous communities being able to develop resources, take an equity stake, and be able to generate income. So, for instance, we have a $3 billion Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. I see that British Columbia has also established a $1 billion loan guarantee to allow nations to buy equity stakes in a variety of different projects. So, for instance, there's a 900 megawatt Cascades power plant that is Indigenous owned. We've got pipeline networks that are Indigenous owned. And so I'm very much looking forward to seeing the impact that will have. It's going to deliver $1.2 billion worth of revenue to our nations in Alberta. And I would encourage every province to do the same, as well as the national government to do the same. The value of natural gas right now is very low. It's $1.72 per gigajoule, as I was mentioning, but it becomes the base fuel for so many products that can be used in the transition. LNG and ammonia are the most stable ways to transport the hydrogen molecule. And so being able to do both of those, I think, opens up new markets as well as reduces emissions. We developed our Alberta Petrochemical Incentive Program, where we give a 12% rebate for anyone who uses natural gas as a feedstock fuel. It's part of the reason why Dow Chemical and Air Products have located in our industrial heartland. I should also mention that when we have done a survey of our pore space, we have the best pore space in the world for carbon capture, utilization, and storage, second only to Russia. And that is part of the reason, because we have an at-scale project that was done by Shell Quest, and we have an at-scale project for the carbon trunk line. We're immediately able to capture those CO2 emissions. The pore space we have, I'm told by my officials, is so large it could theoretically capture all of the emissions already produced by man so far. So we are very keen to make sure that natural gas, in the spirit of COP28, remains that transition fuel. So not only we can help ourselves, our Indigenous partners, the Canadian economy, but also our international partners.
Thank you for that, Premier. So speaking of natural gas, we did see this winter a carve out for Atlantic Canadians on their home heating, but not for natural gas, which is how most of us here in Alberta heat their homes. Do you think that's fair?
Not fair at all. In fact, when you look at how it's December, January, February, and March that we have the greatest need for natural gas. I noticed there's members on the committee from Ontario. Ontario also relies on natural gas principally for home heating, and most people would have been able to enjoy a break during this winter because natural gas is trading so low. But when you layer on a carbon tax that is twice the amount that people are paying for their base fuel, and it's itemized on our home heating bills, we see it, we feel it, especially since we know that home heating oil is about 1.25 times more intensive on CO2 emissions. To see that anyone who is using home heating oil with a higher emissions profile is able to get a 3-year break while we're suffering through the minus 35-degree winters that we often have, it's absolutely not fair. And I do think it is the obligation of the members of Parliament to ensure that fairness in application of federal policy applies to all products in all regions for all types of uses, and that's not happening.
Yeah, I know it's truly unfortunate how asymmetrical the approach from the federal government has been on so many of these issues. The solution that the Prime Minister and his eco-activist minister brought forward were heat pumps, and as you know, I'm in Fort McMurray. Heat pumps don't work super well in minus 50. In fact, they don't really work in minus 20. Do you think heat pumps are a good solution for northern Alberta winters?
They may work in some jurisdictions, but I can tell you in Alberta, my understanding is our insurance companies will not insure a home that only has a heat pump. It needs to have a secondary backup because, as you described, in most places of the province, it will routinely get below minus 30. If pipes freeze, that causes a major insurance wreck. And so they're just not practical in the extremely cold climate that we have in Alberta.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your strong advocacy.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kusmirchuk, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Premier, for being here with us today and having this important conversation. Affordability is absolutely at the center of everything that our federal government is doing, and I appreciate that you are part of that work. I wanted to set the record straight right off the bat. The oil to heat pump affordability program is not just available to communities in the Atlantic provinces. That is a program that is available across Canada from coast to coast to coast across all communities. And as you rightfully pointed out, Premier, home heating oil is often the most expensive, but also the most polluting type of oil. And so again, our federal government has extended that program to all communities across Canada, including in Alberta and including in my home province of Ontario. Premier, I also wanted to highlight the fact that, again, I appreciate how the chair has unilaterally called these meetings and invited yourself and others to testify here because it is such an important meeting. But I just wanted to highlight the fact that it is interesting to me that out of the permanent Conservative members of this OGO committee, none have showed up other than the chair to ask questions of the Premier of Alberta, Premier of Saskatchewan, even though 3 of those permanent members are from Alberta and Saskatchewan. I wanted to highlight the irony of that as well, too, and it is unfortunate. But nonetheless, those that are here are really keen on talking about affordability and about climate change, which are top priorities for this government. Premier, I am very concerned about the fact that you're here to talk about and raise your concerns about the carbon pricing, which will add 3 cents per liter on gas on April 1st. And yet at the same time on April 1st, Premier, you are raising the gas tax in your home province to 13 cents, increasing it by 4 cents. I understand you were at an Axe the Tax rally yesterday, I believe, with the leader of the opposition. Can you clarify for me whether you were protesting? Was it a rally to axe your tax on the gas tax, which is adding 4 cents to a liter?
Hey, Cindy,
if you can just clarify that for me. If you were at a rally to axe the tax that you are increasing in your province by 4 cents.
Sure, happy to answer that. I should let you know that there are 12,000 Albertans that have home heating oil. of our nearly 5 million population. So I think just by those numbers, you can see that your program does not apply equally across the country. I would say as well that as I mentioned, we have had $7 billion worth of foregone revenues because we've been trying to compensate for the inflation crisis at the federal level. In fact, we
Premier, sorry, I don't mean to obtrude. My time is limited here, but are you speaking out against your government's 4-cent increase on the gas tax on April 1st? I'm just curious. And will the government listen to your concerns?
Well, the federal government charges 35 cents in gasoline taxes. We charge 13 cents. Our 13 cents goes to build roads. If your environment minister would let you build roads, maybe some of yours would go to build roads as well.
We do. Thousands of them every year. We do.
Well, he certainly doesn't seem to want to anymore.
Yes.
And the 17 cents, as we know, will not go to build roads.
Premier, I appreciate you not wanting to answer my question on that very sensitive issue of you raising the gas tax by 4 cents in your province, especially in a period right now of really where there's an affordability crisis. But I am very worried about the fact, Premier, that last year you had 2.2 million hectares of land burned in Alberta, and you had 299 days of smoke days in the city of Edmonton. Both records, absolute records. Can you tell us whether climate change caused these wildfires and these smoke days? Yes or no?
I would say that 60% of the fires are caused by human activity, and so we're doing a public campaign to make sure that people are safer.
Well, I thought you would say that, Premier, because I looked at a report from your own Forestry and Parks, which stated that there were 1,121 wildfires last year. Of those, 91 were caused by arson, which is and that includes 262 acres out of the 2.2 million acres that were burned. It's only 0.1% of land that was burned was caused by human activity. Can you speak about the vast majority that was caused by, again, by drought conditions and the heat conditions in your province? And furthermore, the most important question, Madam Premier, what are you doing to fight climate change and the forest fires and the drought in your community that is devastating land in your community and communities?
Well,
I apologize, but
60%.
Premier Smith, I apologize, but Mr. Kuzmierczuk has used up his time. He can respond in writing, because I understand we do have to get you out at a certain time. I apologize. Mr. Savard Tremblay for 2.5, please. Oh, Mrs. Vignola, I apologize. Welcome back for 2.5, please.
Merci beaucoup. Madame.
Thank you very much, Premier. Thank you very much for being here at the committee. Now, my colleague spoke to you about our desire for autonomy, sovereignty. We don't necessarily have the same take on what that would look like, but when it comes to the current budget, we're talking about over $250 billion that are being transferred to Quebec and the Canadian provinces, including
Janet, what's up? How are you today?
Transfers to governments, seniors and family benefits, and that's a substantial amount.
SW? Sorry if I did.
But despite how substantial those finance allocations or funding allocations are, the transfer payments for healthcare to the provinces are not adequate. Now, I think you demanded or requested 35%. And what will the federal government's refusal in that regard have in terms of an impact on Alberta's finances?
The way the program was initially drafted, it was supposed to be an equal cost sharing program. I think over time it developed to a 65-35% cost sharing program, and all the premiers advocated for the federal government to live up to that spirit. They didn't, but we have to make sure that we're providing health care regardless of whether the federal government wants to be a partner. So we're in the process of doing a major hiring of family doctors, nurse practitioners, so we can shore up our primary care system. We're working on getting alternative levels of care patients into appropriate facilities for continuing care, addiction treatment, mental health. And we're going to be expanding our surgical capacity. Those are the things we're going to do, regardless of whether the federal government wants to be an equal partner.
Donc, je comprends que le poids
So I understand that this burden on Alberta's finances is getting bigger and bigger, and is that correct?
I think it's the case for every province. I believe that when we first started being concerned about healthcare costs, it was consuming 20% of our budget. Now it's over 40%, and we still have the pressure of the baby boom population that is going to add not only surgical costs, but also long-term care costs. Plus, we're in the middle of a mental health and addiction crisis, so the pressures are going to continue.
En effet. Vous parlez...
Mr. Bachrach, go ahead, please, for 2.5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Premier, previously you mentioned the government's decision to create a carve-out for Canadians who heat with home heating oil. And you mentioned the inequity of the way that that was approached, and I think there's some agreement there. Our proposal was somewhat different, to give Canadians a break by taking the GST off all forms of home heating. Is that an approach that you would support, given that it would create equity and it would actually result in more savings for people right across the country, regardless of how they heat?
I think it's a great idea, because then it would also remove the problem of the tax on tax that we have on both home heating costs as well as on the price at the pumps. I think it would be a reasonable, just sort of reasonable compromise.
And why do you think that the government, instead of doing that, chose the approach that they did?
Well, I think they want to take credit for transferring back 75 cents on the dollar, thinking that people aren't going to notice that they took the dollar in the first place. And I guess I would look at it, and I sort of question the approach. I kind of wonder what the Liberal members think is going to happen with those dollars. So they come back with $400. Do they think someone's going to go out and buy a $60,000 electric vehicle? Do they think they're going to put $10,000 of solar panels on their roof? Do they think that they're going to convert to geothermal, which costs $20,000? Like, if we want to make a real impact on the kind of vehicles people drive and the kind of heating that they use, those are substantially more investments that are going to be made than a token measure to rebate back a tax. I think I would rather see other programs that would stimulate those kinds of choices.
And you mentioned the emissions plan that you have tabled. Mm-hmm. Now, I assume that this is a commitment to reduce absolute emissions in Alberta over time towards this goal of 2050. In that plan, have you done an analysis of the cost per ton? Like, as I understand it, you're relying heavily on technologies that are not only expensive, but aren't proven at scale. Has there been an analysis on the cost per ton relative to other approaches, like the pricing approach that the federal government has taken?
Well, I can tell you that we will have 3 net zero major industrial operations within the next 2 years. Air Products Hydrogen, the Dow Chemical, Petrochemical, Heidelberg Cement, and let me add Interpipeline as well, because they're going to be an ammonia project. And we do have at scale ability, because our former Premier Ed Stelmach invested over $1 billion in building out Shell's Quest project so that we could firm out the technology. It has now stored 11.5 billion metric tons of CO2, I believe, over in Saskatchewan.
The question was very specifically on the cost per ton of those reductions. Is there an analysis that shows that using those approaches to reduce emissions on a cost per ton basis is less expensive for Canadians than the approach that the federal government has taken?
Well, I can tell you, when I hear the federal environment minister say his approach won't work till 2060, and I've just given you 4 examples that will work within 2 years, it does seem to be that the outcome is what we should be looking at. And if we can get to a net zero outcome, that should be the goal.
Thanks. That is our time. We'll have 2 last 4-minute rounds. Mr. Lawrence, go ahead, please.
And thank you, Premier Smith, for being here today. Appreciate your time. My question will focus on the carbon tax and productivity. Of course, Canada is, as the Governor of the Bank of Canada said, in a productivity crisis. One shining example, or exception, I might say, is Alberta. The average GDP, for example, per worker is about $50 per hour, I should say, about $50. In the energy sector in Alberta, it's $500. My concern is that the carbon tax and other actions by this federal government are putting sand in the gears of our economy and slowing down our productivity when we can least afford it. Would you share my concern?
I do share the concern, and I can tell you that we have had to take a whole variety of measures in order to be able to assist our individuals so that households are able to manage through the inflation crisis that we're facing and have more dollars in their pocket in order so that they can go out and buy the things that they need to, so that we can keep the economy rolling. We had our fuel tax relief program, which I mentioned, saved $2.3 billion because we took it off for 2 entire years. We re-indexed Asian income supports. We gave $20 million to food banks. We've reduced the increase year over year in auto insurance. We've re-indexed our personal income tax. We've supported post-secondary students with a cap on tuition increases. We've supported wage growth in the social sector. We've given rental supplementary supports. We've created an affordable housing plan that'll spend $8 billion over the next 3 years. We've reduced electricity costs through rebates at a cost of $500 per household, or $1 billion over the course of that. And we've given affordability payments of $100 per month for 6 months to our lowest income individuals at a cost of $625 million. All of these are to make sure that people have enough money in their pocket to be able to keep our economy going, because that lends itself to businesses being able to have the dollars they need so that they can make the investments they need to make so that they can improve productivity. It would be helpful if the federal government would stop making it so hard for people and did something equivalent to put the same amount of dollars in the pocket of consumers so that we could keep our economy going strong.
Thank you very much, Premier Smith. And to prove that Ontarians can indeed share with Albertans, I'm going to split the rest of my time with Mr. Alon.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Premier, thanks again for being here and always standing up for Albertans. I'm interested to know, what are you hearing from our great Alberta ranchers, our farmers, our agri-food industry and producers about this carbon tax scam?
I can tell you they're very frustrated because they're producing food not only for us but for the world. We know that we're not only in an energy security crisis but a food security crisis. And if you talk to the grain growers, they'll tell you they are already a net negative business. So yes, they do have inputs, but they're reducing the amount of fertilizer they use and the inputs that they use. But their whole business model is capturing CO2 into the food products for export. When you talk to ranchers, it's the same approach, that ranchers do an amazing job managing biodiversity and our landscapes. Our landscapes in Alberta were created by millions of bison roaming on the lands. And because of that deep fescue, it captures the CO2, not only in the blades of grass, but then also deep into the root system and also the microbes that are in the soil, increasing organic material. And none of that seems to be understood, is that in fact our food producers are providing a service to the planet, not only providing a secure supply of food, but also in addressing some of these environmental issues. So they're very frustrated that every time they use an input, they get walloped with a tax, but they don't get the credit for the biodiversity offsets they provide.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nakfi, go ahead, please, sir, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Premier. Premier, you were speaking about affordability issues in Alberta and across the country. On the other hand, you are raising your gas tax by 4.5 cents. Does it come with a rebate for Albertans, very similar to how the price on pollution through the Canada Carbon Rebate will be giving $2,160 to rural Albertan families?
We eliminate it completely when the price goes above $90, which we did for 2 years. We will eliminate it again when it starts, when the price trends above 80. I'd in fact love to see the federal government do the same thing, that when gas prices are high, they take their tax off completely like we do, and when they're low, they bring it back on.
Sorry, Premier, I have a very limited time. So the answer is that there will be no rebate for Alberta families for the increase they will see on April 1st by 4.5 cents.
The Albertans will get it removed completely if gas prices remain high, and I'd love to see the federal government do the same.
So there is no rebate at the moment. Thank you.
As I said, the federal government could always follow our approach and remove it completely.
Premier, earlier this year, you imposed a moratorium on all renewable energy projects in your province. Your decision impacted over $33 billion in energy investment and over 24,000 jobs. 6 months later, you then released a plan that would permanently ban or limit the construction of renewable energy in over 75% of Alberta, citing a concern that renewable energy projects have an impact on, and I quote, viewscapes. My question is, do oil rigs impact viewscapes? Yes or no?
The wind turbines are the size of the Calgary Tower or the CN
asking about oil rigs. I'm asking about oil rigs, Premier. Yes or no? Do they impact viewscapes?
No, they're not the same size as the Calgary Tower.
Do coal mines impact viewscapes? Yes or no?
We only have 4 advanced coal projects in Alberta. The coal mining is actually more of a British Columbia issue.
Does the Gracie Lake coal mine, a project on the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains, impact viewscapes? Yes or no? I've got very limited time, Premier.
That was a project from the 1950s, and it's currently not in operation.
But does it impact viewscapes?
It's currently going through a regulatory process.
So do you think that oil and coal mines have a lesser impact on viewscapes than solar panels would?
I would say, as I said, it's the wind turbines we're concerned about because of the size of the Calgary Tower. And in some of these projects, there's 100 or 200 of them on a single site. And they also find themselves in migratory pathways, so they have an impact on bird and bat populations.
So your restrictions will not impact solar panel projects, renewable projects in the province of Alberta?
The issue around solar is making sure that it doesn't take up arable land, prime agriculture land. We're spending a lot of money with the federal government on irrigation, and there's certain uses that are incompatible. You can't put pivots on a landscape that has acres and acres of solar panels. So we're asking for them to be moved to marginal landscapes.
So I'm having a hard time, if you're not going to allow renewable sources of energy to take place and create thousands of jobs and investment in Alberta, how are you proposing to reduce emissions that you're claiming that Alberta is doing when the evidence is to the contrary?
Well, the reason why we have so much solar and wind in our province is because we have a free market. You'll notice that there are many other jurisdictions that don't, so they don't have wind and solar. But the reason wind and solar make sense in our province is because there's natural gas backup. You can talk to any solar or wind provider, and they know that we need natural gas. Natural gas has a carbon tax on it. And so if you want to see more wind and solar, you should take the taxes off of the peaker plants that are going to back them up.
Thank you, Premier. Chair, I'm just going to use my remaining time to move that the committee invite the International Association of Firefighters, IAFF, to appear in relation to the ongoing study on the main estimates. Thank you.
Sure. How about if we release our witness and we can go to that?
Thank you.
Premier Smith, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
It. Thank you to the committee.
Did you want to propose by a certain date or anything, Mr. Nakvi, or?
As soon as yeah, we should have them. You're so good in scheduling witnesses so urgently that I have full faith and trust in you.
So on Good Friday, we'll be meeting with the IAFF. Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Speaking list, or are we fine to adopt that, colleagues? Do you want to just read it in slowly, just so I'll make sure? Oh, I have Ms. Atwin, but do you want to just repeat it slowly, just so our clerk can write it?
I will, and I would suggest that as soon as possible, Chair. And the motion reads that the committee invite the International Association of Firefighters, IAFF, to appear in relation to the ongoing study on the main estimates.
Sure. Before the estimates are tabled. How's that? Yeah. Ms. Atwin and then Ms. Backrack, or Mr. Backrack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking for some clarity. I wasn't sure if you were joking or not about meeting on Good Friday. I mean, this week has been full of surprises and curveballs, so I wouldn't completely rule that out, but I'd really like to know because I'd like to celebrate Easter with my family. Thank you.
Yeah, good one. Mr. Backrack, go ahead. Then Mr. Kusmirchuk, then Mr. Lawrence.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I support the motion. And
Salut, Julien.
Nope.
Comment ça va? Ça va bien, je suis en commission.
Oh, there we go. She's
Sorry,
on with
start
somebody
again,
else,
Mr. Backrack, please.
Yes, I certainly support the intention behind the motion and certainly support many of the goals of the International Association of Firefighters. I'm just curious because our study of the estimates is now taking some twists and turns into areas that are not traditionally directly associated with the estimates. Perhaps the mover of the motion could just provide a little bit of background on the subject area so that we can prepare adequately for the meeting.
Sure. We have Mr. Kusmirchuk, then Mr. Lawrence up, and then we can get back to Mr. Nakvi if he wishes to respond to that. But go ahead, Mr. Kusmirchuk.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And what I would just say as soon as possible, but during a regular sitting of the committee when the House is in session and when the House is sitting.
Fair. Mr. Lawrence, and then we'll go back to Mr. Nakvi if he wishes to respond to Mr. Backrack, and then Mrs. Vignola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd just like to amend the motion by including the following: Premier Fury, Premier Houston, and Premier King.
Very nice.
Sub-amendment. Okay, I will take a speaking order on the sub-amendment. Ms. Vignola, your hand is still up. Is that on the sub-amendment or the original amendment? And then Ms. Atwin, I assume, on the sub-amendment?
Well, it could be on both, in fact. The sub-amendment more the amendment. Well, as far as the Premier's appearance is concerned, here's my question. When we've gotten through the 10 Premiers of Quebec and Canadian provinces, as well as those in charge of the territories, well, it's important to hear from them, and I'll say this and I'll repeat it once again. I'm absolutely convinced that hearing from them will help us to reach consensuses, find solutions. That said, is this committee the right place? Well, yes, I know it's a matter of budgets, but shouldn't the premiers who have their own fora to discuss these issues, well, how should I put this? I'm just opening the door here to this possibility. If the committee does agree to hear from each and every premier from nationwide, and that is a majority decision, well, that's how it'll be. But I'm just wondering if we are the appropriate forum for this, the right place. Now, as far as the Firefighters Association are concerned, I'd be very curious to hear what the rationale is behind this. We seem to be, in a sense, kind of the omnibus committee, folks that should be appearing before the Environment Committee, the Finance Committee, that would better meet their objectives, and yet here they are landing here with us. So I'm kind of desperately trying to understand that, but I'd like to hear the rationale and justifications behind all of this.
Okay. Sorry, Ms. Atwin, we'll get you. I have a point of order.
I'm hoping I'll have the indulgence of the committee. I mentioned Premier Fury, Houston, and King, but I omitted to say Premier Ford, which I meant to include in the sub-amendment.
Ms. Atwin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would echo a lot of the comments of our colleague, Ms. Vignola, as far as rationale. I'd also highlight that Premier Houston asked to appear at Finance, not at OGO, and the other premiers have not asked to appear here as well. So I'm questioning why their names would be included in this. I do appreciate that we're actually seeing a motion for this and that we're being involved in the discussion and decision making for this potential appearance, which is a nice market change from what we've been experiencing. But yeah, I'm going to need to know a bit more of the rationale around that as well. Thank you.
Kuzmierczak, are you fine yielding the floor to Mr. Nakvi to explain? Oh, and then Ms. Vignola, will we be able to go to Mr. Nakvi to flesh out his motion a bit before, or would you like to speak first? Okay. Why don't you speak on the motion, and then, of course, we'll get back. I see Mr. Hallan, then we'll return to the sub-amendment. I realize it's a tiny bit out of order, but we've had many requests for you to flesh out this motion.
So you want me to speak on the main motion?
Well, it was request I think three of our members were asking you to flesh out why the estimates, et cetera. So why don't we do that, and then we'll return to the sub-amendment.
Yeah, so look, we've now just spent 2 days talking about price and pollution, climate change, carbon tax. Speaker, with all due respect, Chair, with all due respect to you, you unilaterally invited a few premiers to come and present here. I think it's important to hear from people who are directly involved in dealing with the impact of climate change. Our firefighters are on the front lines, and all of us members have heard from them the impact of climate change, the kind of circumstances that they are seeing right now on the ground in pretty much every province across this country in terms of climate change, in terms of the impact of floods. They are the one who are being called upon to come and help Canadians every single day. If we have given an opportunity to 3 premiers and come and deny climate change, deny any action that should be taken to fight climate change, I think it's important that we hear from people like firefighters also to draw the complete picture as to the impact of climate change on Canadians and what are they seeing that impact is and the impact on them.
Thanks. We'll get back to the sub-amendment. Mr. Lawrence, Mr. Halan, and then Ms. Atwin.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank my honourable colleague, Philip Lawrence, for a very, very good sub-amendment. That makes absolute sense and is very relevant. And I'll address some of the comments that Ms. Atwin made as well. I think it is important to have the other premiers here, as Mr. Nuckley said, to talk about climate change, but also the negative impact that the carbon tax has on families in their provinces as well. And to address Ms. Atwin, the reason why it's being taken up in this committee is because the finance chair went into hiding when the premiers came calling. It was the chair of this committee, the great Kelly McCauley.
Point of order,
Edmonton
Mr. Chair.
West,
That is
Edmonton Mall.
point of order, Mr. Chair. That is inaccurate. That is inaccurate.
I appreciate Mr. Kuzmierczak. That's not a point of order.
The chair of the finance committee was clear
Mr.
that he did not receive a request from the majority of the committee.
Thanks.
So,
continue,
yes.
Mr. Hallam.
I want to thank the great member of West Edmonton Mall for stepping up since the finance chair, Peter Fonseca, went into hiding when the premiers came calling. So I think it is appropriate in following that we have the premiers come here and testify not only on the impact of failed policies, environmental policies by this Liberal NDP government on not just the firefighters, but on their own residents in their provinces. And in one case of the premier that Mr. Lawrence put forward, it's a Liberal premier who said spike the hike against this Liberal NDP government that's absolutely obsessed with this carbon tax and making sure the cost of gas, groceries, and home heating go up, driving more people into a food bank, as we see 2 million people going into a food bank in a single month, and 1 million more projected to. And can you believe in Canada today, there's a group of 10,000 Canadians in a Facebook group that are going dumpster diving because they can't afford food.
Point of order, Speaker.
All of these things are very relevant.
Chair.
Hold on.
That's why the premiers need to be
This is not this is not the debate floor of the House of Commons. We've heard all your talking points. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Let's talk about this motion, Chair, and
thank you.
And let's get to it.
Thank you very much. If we could return, and just colleagues, just very quick. Oh, I see everyone wishes to speak now. Just very quickly on this, I was referring mistakenly to the amendment offered by Mr. Lawrence as the sub-amendment. We are on the amendment to the original motion from Mr. Nackby. Just to be clear, Mr. Arlan, if we can get back to and stay on the. Oh,
my point.
I'm taking a speaking list. I have Ms. Atwin, then Mr. Bragdon. Then I have Ms. Goodridge, Ms. Vignola, Mrs. Vignola, then Mr. Kuzmierczak. Go ahead, Ms. Atwin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's the relevance of bringing in premiers to speak on an issue where we want to pull in the expertise of Firefighters Association. I think it's clear that the premiers were not experts on the main estimates. They're not necessarily experts on carbon pricing either. We heard a lot of rhetoric, but no real tabled information. And so again, I would question the linkages of this conversation around, again, we're supposed to be studying the main estimates. And so again, to highlight that those premiers did not request to appear before our committee. I think we should respect their time, actually, and the responsibility that they have to look after their own provinces, including mine at home here in New Brunswick. Again, there was a action in the legislature here in New Brunswick that was not taken as far as looking at electricity price increases. Instead, our premier was here to grandstand. And so I think this is all a game and a circus and a farce at this point. I think that Canadians deserve better than this. But I would like to, at the very least, if we're going to open this Pandora's box, I'd like to hear from experts on climate change. Perhaps natural resource ministers would be a better fit. I'm not proposing an amendment, but I'd just like to put that forward, that this is increasingly making very little sense, and it's certainly wasting our time as a committee.
Thanks, Mr. Bragdon,
We're
please.
going to sign up for that dumpster diving site on Facebook.
So you do not have a
And
headphone on,
after
Mr.
we show the
Bragdon.
Mo interview,
Thank you, sir.
Mo testimony. That'll be fun, I think.
Sorry about that. I just want to clear up something here. Any idea that premiers should not be addressing this committee or any committee for that matter on behalf of their constituents and on behalf of the people that live in their provinces. Premiers are the first ministers of this country. They should be heard on any issue that we deem that we want to hear from them or that they would like to have input for. They asked to speak to the Finance Committee.
Sally,
that was
what's
not
up? Good to see
granted.
you.
Now they've asked, and when asked to speak here, they jumped at the opportunity to do that because this is a top of mind issue for every Canadian. And I know back home here in New Brunswick, it is top of mind because every time they go to the grocery store, every time New Brunswickers fill up their car, every time they take their kids to a sporting event or they're going to work, they have to drive. And this tax is disproportionately affecting those of us that live in rural communities and small towns. And the fact that premiers want to address this committee and speak to this committee about this issue, I think it would behoove this committee to make sure every premier that wants to speak on this has the opportunity to do that. They are Canada's first ministers. We need to hear from them and they should be heard from. So I think we should go ahead with this.
Thanks. I have Mrs. Goodridge and then Mrs. Vignola and then Mr. Kuzmirchuk.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's absolutely relevant to be hearing from our premiers. Their budgets are being impacted substantially from this. They have a very important space to represent when it comes to how this is impacting Canadians from coast to coast to coast. We heard today very clearly from Premier Higgs and Premier Smith how this is impacting and making families make very difficult choices. This is directly relevant to our supplementary estimates. This is absolutely critical information, and I agree with Madame Vignola que nous devrons avoir l'opportunité.
That we must have the opportunity to hear from each and every premier. We're here to determine what the impact of a carbon tax is on their provincial economies and families.
It's political grandstanding coming from the Liberals, wanting to shut down hearing from premiers that they don't like, being triggered by people that happen to be supportive of oil and gas. And frankly, we have to stand up against this. And so I fully support hearing more from this.
Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I really don't like people putting words in my mouth. Gee whiz. I really don't like it. I'm just going to rectify what was just said.
Thanks for dropping in.
And also rectify what a Liberal member said first. Yes, it's important for me that the premiers of Quebec and the Canadian provinces can be heard by us. But, and a big but, I don't want you to misconstrue what I'm saying, but Ogo is perhaps not the right place for this to happen. There is a federal provincial roundtable, for example. There's the Finance Committee. That would be potentially the proper place for this. So please don't misquote me by only selectively quoting my words. Secondly, now I listened to this again on Parvu, and at no point have I heard from a premier in attendance today deny the impact of climate upheaval both on the economy and the environment. So just let me clarify things here. When people say, oh yes, we've heard from folks who've denied the climate impacts and that other people are going to say, yes, those impacts do exist. Today, there was no Premier who denied the impact of climate change, and the Premier of Alberta stressed the fact that there were forest fires that were precipitated by humans, but she didn't deny the impact of climate change on the economy. So please, don't selectively quote me. You know, someone might say that I'm a partisan of oil, a fan of oil. But listen, please don't selectively quote me. Please don't twist my words. Please, it's important to not do this, to refrain from doing this. Now, as far as the premiers are concerned, I stand my ground. It would behoove us to study the estimates. Now, I understand that the premiers do have some input when it comes to the estimates. They want to be heard. We should be hearing from them. And they don't get the sense that that is actually happening. So there's the rub. They don't get the sense that people are listening to them. There is a round table that is there for provincial and territorial premiers, including Quebec, and that is the proper forum for them to come up with solutions together and to dive deep into the issues. So that's what I said, and I'll repeat myself. Please don't put words in my mouth. Please don't twist anything that I've said. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McNola. Mr. Kuzmirchuk, I see your hand up, but I'm getting a sense from looking around the room that everyone's...
I'd like to say a few things, actually, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead, of course.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you know what? Over the last 2 weeks, the committee members here at OGO were treated like doormats by you yourself, the chair. And we've raised that issue on a number of occasions where we weren't consulted. We weren't consulted on the meetings. We weren't consulted on the witnesses. And now what we're seeing, Mr. Chair, is the OGO committee. And I've been on the OGO committee for 5 years, and many of the members around this table have been here for 5 years. We do serious work here. We do good work around this table. We are worker bees around this table. We put our heads down. We do good work, and we study issues of great importance to to our residents and our constituents in Canada. But I am seeing right now that good work and that spirit being thrown away, and the OGO committee being turned into a soapbox for premiers, an election platform for premiers. And they have, as my honorable colleague mentioned, they have many platforms already that they can grandstand on. And I really take objection to the fact that they want to turn what is a hardworking committee, a dedicated committee, into their own personal grandstanding and soapbox and election platform. Do your campaigning somewhere else. We had 3 premiers come before this committee. Each of those 3 premiers have a wildfire crisis in their provinces where millions of hectares of land have been burned, billions of dollars in costs. And we heard 3 premiers coming here, all talk, no action, no plan for to fight and address the climate crisis. No plan, all talk, no plans, no action. And the screaming hypocrisy of premiers coming here to decry a 3% or 3 cent increase on the price of a liter of gas, 3 cents on the price of a liter of gas because of the price on pollution, when in their own provinces, the Premier of New Brunswick is increasing hydro rates by 12%, and the Premier of Alberta is increasing the gas tax by 4 cents, and not mentioning a word about that. And coming here and saying nothing about the fact that the parliamentary budget officer clearly stated in the last meeting, was clear as day, stating that 4 out of 5 families are better off with the price on pollution and the Canada carbon rebate. And no answers in terms of why the premiers, especially in the case of Alberta, a family of 4 in Alberta receives about $2,100 back
what's up? How are you?
on the Canada carbon rebate every year. And no mention about what that will do in terms of the affordability crisis that so many families are facing. And so there's nothing new that came from these conversations. It was nothing new. Everything that was said in the newspapers, was said already by these premiers in the media, on television, in rallies, nothing new. And all it did was take time away from this committee to do the work that it's supposed to do, that it's designed to do, and in this case, to study the main and estimates and provide a report back to the House of Commons. This is a complete taking over, taking hostage of this committee and its work, and its important work. And it raises the question as well too. Each of these premiers, especially in Alberta, has a healthcare crisis on their hands. The heck are they doing here on a 2-hour committee meeting at OGO, talking about spewing the same lines that they've said on every other platform in the media and newspapers, bringing absolutely nothing to this discussion, nothing new. They have a healthcare crisis in their provinces. What are they doing here at OGO committee? Isn't there a better use of their time? And finally, I would say the added thing that I would also add is, again, if these meetings with the premiers were so important, why is it that the 3 conservative permanent members of this committee were not present at any of the meetings and the testimonies of the premiers, especially considering that we had 2 conservative MPs, permanent members on this committee, that are from Alberta and 1 from Saskatchewan, and they weren't even bothered. They couldn't even be bothered to shake the sand off their sandals, grab a laptop and join us. Everyone else was here, including my NDP colleague that was not feeling, that was ill, that was downright ill, and made an effort to be here. And so I want OGO to get back to the way it was, the focus on good work, asking tough questions, doing research, having opportunities to prepare for our witnesses so we can ask the tough questions, we could hold people to account, provide recommendations for the government for policies. That's the way we've done it for 5 years. But somehow the last number of months, this committee has been hijacked. Its members have been treated as doormats, and this committee is turning into nothing but a propaganda tool and a soapbox for somebody's campaigns. And that is not the way it should be. That is not the way it should be. And I asked the chair to listen to what the committee said in the last meeting when we passed the motion. Work with us. Collaborate with us. Let's get back to work. Let's put this childish grandstanding aside. Let's get back to the work that Canadians expect from all of us. And that's all I have to say about that.
45 minutes now. And
thank you very much. So we get to vote on the amendment.
Man, it is hard to watch.
Do so on division, colleagues.
How we understand and learn, I guess. It's tough.
So you're requesting a recorded vote?
Yes.
Perfect.
I think. Are they winding up?
The question is on the amendment put forward by Mr. Lawrence, that the motion be amended by adding the premiers.
We're going to do the wrap up now, and then we're going to watch
Ms.
the
Atwin?
Scott Moe part. And if anybody wants to hang out, we're going to sign up on
Mr. Lightbound?
Facebook for that dumpster diving page.
Cool.
I think that'll be fun.
Mr. Nakvi?
See what it's all about.
No.
I've never tried something like
Mr.
that.
Kuzmarchuk?
But we're going to try it at the end.
Mr. Sousa?
No.
Hey, someone, what's up?
Ms. Goodridge?
In favor.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Mr. Halan?
In favor.
Madame Vignola?
No.
Mr. Backrack?
No. Oh, sorry.
We got both, Ms. Backrack, thanks. Okay, the amendment is defeated. Can we record it as well on the main motion, Mr. Nackby?
So the question is on the main motion put forward by Mr. Nackby. Ms. Atwin?
In favor.
Mr. Lightbound?
Oh.
Mr. Nackby?
Yes. Don't mess this up.
Mr. Kuzmarchuk?
Yes.
Mr. Sousa?
Yes.
Ms. Goodridge?
In favor.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Mr. Halan?
Yes.
Madame Vignola?
Wait.
And Mr. Backrack?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. How about today is Thursday, a week, Friday at noon for witnesses? Everyone, to send them in to the clerk. Is that fair? So a week tomorrow at noon for suggested witnesses for that, and then we'll figure out when the witnesses are available and proceed from there. Colleagues, thank you very much. If nothing else, we're adjourned.
Well, ain't that something, guys? So, as we promised, we're going to jump into this other piece with Premier Moe right away. Just, I wasn't exactly organized for this, but very close to being organized. So, let's find it fast. I'm sorry, gang. I thought I had it really ready to go. Here it is. Oh, of course. Of course. Here we're going. We are going.
Investment into just those innovations in the industries that we do well, because the fact of the matter is this, and this is from a Saskatchewan perspective. We produce food, fuel, and fertilizer, and we produce not only the highest quality, most affordable food, fuel, and fertilizer that we do well, because the fact of the matter investment into just those innovations in the industries that we do well, because the fact of the matter is this, and this is from a Saskatchewan perspective. We produce food, fuel, and fertilizer, and we produce not only the highest quality, most affordable food, fuel, and fertilizer that you can find in the world, and we produce it for over 150 countries around the world. We produce the most sustainable food, fuel, and fertilizer that you can find on Earth. And I think that's something for each of us to remember is never say never. We can always do better, and we should be making every effort to do that around this table on behalf of the folks that we represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier Moe. Mr. Reddekopp, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Premier Moe. It's great to have another common sense conservative voice in Ottawa, Saskatchewan voice, in Ottawa to talk about the carbon tax. It's very clear that the Liberals are nervous about this meeting and that they don't really want to hear from Saskatchewan people, but I do. So, as you know, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has produced a report that confirms this year alone, the average family in Saskatchewan is going to lose $525 to the carbon tax. And the NDP Liberal Costly Coalition plans to quadruple the carbon tax, meaning that families in Saskatchewan will ultimately see their losses increasing to $1,723 a year, according to the same report. So the NDP Liberal Coalition will be ripping out thousands of dollars from the pockets of people in Saskatchewan. What's the impact of the carbon tax on families living in our province? Oh, you're muted, Mr.
My apologies. That's the annual impact directly to Saskatchewan families, taking into account, what they are paying for the carbon tax, some of the indirect costs that are coming to them due to the carbon tax, a cost, for example, at the grocery store. But what we have in this province as well is we're very much a natural resource-based economy here. Rooted in agriculture, and we're trying to climb that economic value chain. We're trying to climb with respect to the jobs that we're creating, the opportunities and the market access that we're creating. For example, we're attracting investment into the canola oil industry so that we can provide canola oil as opposed to the raw seed. That's climbing that value chain. It's creating jobs here at home, and where the the carbon tax comes in addition to the direct impact to Saskatchewan families that I would put forward, drive more just because we are more geographically dispersed, in particular those families in the north. But it also comes into a significant impact in the jobs that are available here because industries are looking with, this is a hindrance for their investment. We have been able to attract significant investment in spite, I would say, of this hindrance, not in any way because of it. However, that's not to say that we aren't having active discussions with the industry and the people of Saskatchewan on how we continue to reduce our carbon footprint here. And so the impact is very real to families directly. It's very real, I would say, in particular to northern families, where they traditionally have been heating their homes with electricity. They are seeing some solace and savings in that with the recent decision that the provincial government has made here. And we, again, extend to the federal government the opportunity to extend their decision around home heating fuel to all Canadians and all types of heating fuel. But they are having some reprieve on that as we speak. But I would say they still have to drive a significant distance for any significant level of supplies. And so families very much are feeling it directly. They're also feeling it through the job prospects and opportunities, of which I'd say are strong in Saskatchewan, but certainly could be even stronger.
So you've been a strong opponent of the carbon tax since you took office. Your predecessor, Brad Wall, was as well. You've had the opportunity to speak with the Prime Minister, launch legal challenges, et cetera. How many different appeals have you made to Ottawa to stop the carbon tax?
All of them. On every occasion that I've had the opportunity to speak with the Prime Minister, whether it be most recently, we had a significant presence at COP28 in Dubai. Saskatchewan did. We had over 60 provincial and national businesses, delegation, industry representatives, post-secondary folks that were with us there. I had the opportunity to speak with a couple of ministers, including the Minister of Environment in that setting. Each and every time through multiple ministers and the Prime Minister himself, we have voiced our opposition to this, what is essentially amounts to an inflationary tax. My predecessor, at the very early days of its introduction, and I remember it well because I was Environment Minister at the time, I was in Montreal when the Prime Minister raised to his feet and introduced this tax on Canadians. I believe it was October the 3rd, 2016, if I'm not mistaken. But my predecessor, Brad Wall, had very quickly asked for, has anyone done the economic analysis on this? And I think what we're seeing today with the Bank of Canada's statement, Bank of Canada Governor's statement, or the Bank of Canada's statement around the productivity emergency that we are facing in this nation, tells us that, no, we haven't done an economic analysis on this policy and many others, but it's high time we should. And I'm not in any way saying that we should be making decisions that are increasing the emissions in our industries, but we should be looking at what are the emissions in our industries relative to their counterparts and competitors in other areas of the world. Are we cleaner? And can we do more? And in the meantime, we should ensure that we are making every effort to make our cleaner products available to the world, displacing some of those dirtier products that are produced in other areas. And I think if you accept the fact that climate change is real, if you accept the fact that climate change is a global challenge, not just one in Saskatchewan or even Canada for that matter, we need to work together with our national partners on achieving global solutions.
So as you know, the federal NDP has been a strong supporter of the carbon tax, and they voted to support this Liberal government every time, including a couple of times last week. As Premier, how do you feel about an NDP party that supports this hurtful carbon tax and is seemingly against our farmers, against our oil and gas producers, and just not willing to listen to the pain of everyday folks in Saskatchewan?
It's disappointing because we have a provincial arm of that NDP party here that opposes Saskatchewan's wishes to remove the carbon tax, the consumer carbon tax off of Saskatchewan families, and ultimately the cost that it instills on the industries that are employing those very same families. When it comes to oil and gas, for example, and I'm happy to say that if the rest of the world produced oil and gas like we do here in Saskatchewan, the similar type products, global emissions from oil production would drop 25% overnight. That hasn't come about easily. That has come about by investment in the Saskatchewan energy industry, investment in methane reductions. And so the 60% methane reductions that were put forward a couple of years ago, our oil industry was actually able to meet them. They cannot get to the 75%.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm pleased to stand alongside Jason Nixon, Minister of Seniors.
We jumped into something there. Sorry, I didn't know that the interview was going to come to such a quick ending. So what we're going to try to do now is, Kirk, now would be a good time to try. We're going to try to do something that we've never tried before. This was a super successful episode. Like, there's a lot of people that were watching, a lot of new people. It's so much fun. And now what we're going to try to do is this call, and hopefully, hopefully this is going to work.
Now would be a good time to try.
We're going
to try to do something that we've never tried before. This was a super successful episode. Like, there's a lot of people that were
Kirk,
watching.
I'm trying, man.
It's so much fun. And now what we're going to try to do is this call, and hopefully
all right, guys. Sorry, I know that we're keeping you hanging here at the end. I'm just curious. I'm going to keep trying this to see if I can get it right. Thank you all for watching all of that. We're going to try to connect with our friend Kirk that's in the room a lot and see if we can pull that one off. So,
sorry, I know that we're keeping you
our man.
here.
So, Kirk, get rid of your volume on your computer.
Right. Thank you all for watching all of that. We're going to try to connect with our friend.
Can you hear me?
Room. Yeah.
Get rid of the volume. Do you have volume on your computer?
Yep. Hang on.
These are just some of the kinks that we'll have to work out for when we get it right and smooth.
I know
we're going to be doing these wrap-ups.
I'll get rid of your volume on
the shows.
Cool.
We'll have to work on it to make it smooth. Because right now I'm catching audio.
Get rid of the volume. Is it too volume on your?
Yeah, I'll turn my volume way down.
I don't think it. I don't even think it's. Maybe it is you. I don't know.
There, it's gone.
Yeah. So okay. So that was it. Yes, sir. That was a fun show today. A lot of people were watching. Had a bunch of new people come in the room. Had some arguments in the room, but the people are civil. See, they're adults.
Yes, and it's much appreciated.
At least, like, if you're going to argue, do it as a adult. Like,
absolutely. It's always good to have a little bit of difference of opinion.
Yeah.
As long as it's polite, and yeah, that's what makes the world go round, as far as I'm concerned.
Again, I wasn't able to just watch the chat, but it seemed like it was civil. Like, I don't mind Lightning Rod. It's a strange thing. She likes hanging out in our group, and it's like, you're the only one that thinks the way you think. But also, I would like to have more people like her come to our group, because I think we'll change them.
I would love to see an interview with you and Lightning Rod. That would be awesome.
And Calamaru, I think. No, was it Calamaru or no? It was Too Slow. That was getting a little. But again, they're both respectful. They just disagree. And
and nothing wrong with that, man.
To be frank, I've chatted a few times in the comments, just a little bit with Lightning Rod. I've even asked, it's like, why do you come and watch it here? Because, like, my room is about 98%, like, similar thinking, that they're open-minded and not racist. They just want change and they're frustrated, all those things. I haven't gotten a straight answer to the question, but again, no, always polite though. Like, so what are you going to do about that? Like, you can't say to somebody that, oh, you can't be on my channel, whatever. Always polite. And it's fun a little bit we all can't just agree. That's boring.
Oh, let it ride, man. That's all cool.
Pretty fun. Anyways, Kirk, we're going to keep it short. This has been a long episode. I just wanted to see if we could, I'll call you right back right after this just to see.
Okay, man.
Thanks for being game. And, no, that's cool. Then stick it out with me for 3 hours watching that bullshit. Like,
I got it.
No, but it was fun today. Like, I thought.
It was.
I thought Blake from New Brunswick was interesting. Danielle Smith is a star. She, like, if there wasn't Poilievre, she could probably be the next prime minister. Like,
oh, she's got so much potential.
Man. Like,
she's got so much potential.
So, like again, they're both young. She and Poilievre are my age, I think, and they've got years to come, and we'll see. It's always going to turn. We'll have these conservatives in power for 4 years, and it'll be great. They'll put in a couple of changes, and then in the second term, they'll get dirty. Just like, I know that you're a conservative, so you'll never think they would do that, but
trust me.
It's cyclical, right? It goes around in circles. That's the thing.
After what I've seen over the past few years, I don't trust a politician as far as I can throw them. Liberal, conservative.
That's experience.
It doesn't matter.
That's life experience. So,
but best we got is, in my opinion, Pierre.
In the short term, it certainly is. Like, why? Are you going to vote for Bloc Québécois? Are you going to vote for Jagmeet Singh? Like, are you going to vote for an independent? You're Alberta, right? So you're probably not going to elect like, that's a wasted vote almost. And no Green Party, like Pierre Poilievre. And also you could take your opinion and be like, no, I think it is Trudeau, but you'd have to look and be like, well, probably 82% of the country don't agree with you. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it is Poilievre's option.
Me personally, if I had somebody tell me, look, 7 of your premiers are in disagreement with your policies, you're darn right, I'd be the first one to snap to and goes, what?
I don't even think the Liberals will run Trudeau in the next election. Like,
is
recognition that important when name recognition is associated to something negative? Like, because that's too, like, how many terms of corrupt Trudeau liberal stuff is this country going to have to put up with? You are young enough to be, like, living it live when Pierre Trudeau was in power. But a good time, like, in the later term. And
Cuddle.
Right? It'll be interesting to say. Anyways, Kirk, we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah. Cheers. I got snow to shovel.
I'll talk to you in like 2 minutes. Anyways, we're going to wrap this one up. Thank you all so much for watching. Question period.
Bye all. Been a pleasure.
Yeah, we're out. Kirk, you're gone. And
cheers.
Yeah, later, man. That's just a little piece that we're going to be trying to do at the end of the episodes, guys. And I think it's something that we can do. It's fun. That is it. We are out. I tried something different. We had a great episode today. We're getting out. I'm hungry. Gonna get something healthy to eat and try to stay warm. We'll catch you tomorrow. Back tomorrow. Same time, same place. Who knows what we'll watch? Canadian federal politics. Right here. Thanks for watching, everybody. It's amazing what we're growing here.